Can you actually get rid of your film that I can see your screen? Is it possible?
What? No,
It's okay.
sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to this special edition of the Taiwan's election coverage on Radio Taiwan International. We're coming to you live from the RTI studio in Taipei. My name's Emily, and this is my co-host, Chunyi.
Hi.
For the next 4 hours, we'll be here on the RTI website as well as on YouTube Live as we watch votes being counted and results revealed. We'll discuss what to look for, why this election matters, what the results may mean for Taiwan going forward. Sitting here with us, we're very happy to have Taipei-based journalist Chris Horton, contributor to the to the New York Times and the Nikkei Asian Review. So welcome, Chris.
Hi, Emily. Hi, 20.
Hi.
Thanks for having me here.
Later on the program, we'll also have two more guests. Lev Nachman, a political science PhD student studying social movements and party politics in Taiwan and Hong Kong, as well as Nate Maynard, a consultant whose work focuses on green energy and economy. So look for them at the top of every hour. So tonight, ballots for mayors, county magistrates, chief leaders, councilmen, councilwomen will be counted first. Then we'll get to the 10 referendum questions. So stay tuned. Make some popcorn or dumplings. And we hope you enjoy the show. Let's get to it. Chwee, what are we deciding today?
Okay, today we see the entire nation almost queuing up at the poll stations casting their votes, and the turnout rate is unexpectedly high. I've personally never seen this before. So today we call this election 9-in-1 election, meaning that we're electing mayors and city councilors in 6 municipalities, including Taipei City, New Taipei City, Taoyuan, Taichung City, Tainan City, and Kaohsiung City. And the residents of the nation's 16 counties will also elect their magistrates or commissioners and county councilors, as well as at the village level and the smallest administrative unit we call Li, or neighborhood wardens. And then some indigenous people will be electing their representatives as well. And that's why we call 9-in-1 election.
I think there are about 20,000 candidates today. Is that correct? Or
I think 21,000 candidates.
wow. Going for 10,000 seats.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
So what should you look out for today?
I think the correction here is 11,000 offices, 11,000 seats. So we're looking at the election results, the ballots counting here for, I think showing on the screen is for the 6 municipalities, and that's also what the majority of the people is paying attention to, especially on 3 major cities, Taipei, New Taipei, Kaohsiung.
I think as the votes are starting to get counted right now, but as more votes are being counted, rolling out, we will talk in depth a little bit more about some of these cities and the candidates. But before we get there, it's going to be a long night. Since we have Chris here, I actually wanted to ask Chris some questions looking from international media. So, Chris, you've been here for 2 years. You've been covering the Tsai administration since the beginning.
Yes.
Since her inaugural. How has the mood changed within the administration in the past 2 years, do you think?
Well, I think I've only been in Taiwan for 3 years, but my understanding is there's always a lot of excitement and high hopes whenever there's a new president elected. And very quickly, the electorate starts to maybe maybe sour is a strong word, but they don't, approval ratings drop, and Tsai's approval rating is not super high, but by Taiwanese standards, I think it's like mid-20s, I think. And Ma was way lower than that at the end of his administration. I think Tsai's, she's got a tough job. I think she's shown herself to be competent. She's disappointed a lot of people on indigenous matters, same-sex marriage, but and a lot of, I've heard a lot of complaints from Taiwanese people about Tsai's ability to handle the cross-strait relationship. But there really isn't a cross-strait relationship to handle, because China won't talk with her. And making ceding sovereignty a precondition for talks is basically, it just means that she's never going to speak with China unless China backs down, which it won't. So they're hoping that she'll be in Beijing. They're hoping and doing everything they can to make Tsai a one-term president. And the first step towards that would be a poor showing by the DPP in this election. And it's hard, it's still early to say, but it looks like the KMT is fully in it in some of these key mayoral elections. So New Taipei City, Taichung, and Kaohsiung, the KMT's looking strong, but it's still early, so it's hard to say how that's going to go. But if the DPP can hold 2 of those seats, then you'll have a situation where she looks like she's a steady pair of hands guiding the party forward. If all 3 go to the Kuomintang, then you'll have a situation where maybe she'll probably face pressure to step down as DPP party chair, which then makes things a little more complicated 14 months from now. Even before then, next year, she could face a primary challenger from within her own party. William Lai is one of the people that might do that. There's also, depending on how Han Guoyu, the surprising the surprising upstart down in Kaohsiung for the Kuomintang, if he does well, if he wins, I think he'll be in a very good position to potentially be the KMT presidential candidate in 14 months' time. If Ko Wen-je, the mayor of Taipei, if he does well, and it looks like he's off to a solid start so far with the ballots that are in, you could have something where maybe it's Tsai Ing-wen, Ko Wen-je, and Han Guoyu in the next presidential election, and that would potentially, it's really hard to say how that would go.
You're super well versed in Taiwanese politics for the past given that you've been here just 2 years. But what does that mean internationally? Like, when you write for the international media, what are they looking for? What are they looking out of this election?
Well, everybody wants the China angle, right? Taiwan, for most editors, Taiwan is a China story. It's part of the China story. And, if you're a reporter here, you realize that that's just not how it is. People aren't voting about China here. This election, I would say it's like most places. People want to be better off, and in the last 2 years, have people's situations changed for the better? I don't think they've changed for the worse, but like wages haven't gone up. I think that's a very big thing. You still have the brain drain heading out. Young talented people. Staying here is almost like a patriotic move because there's all these opportunities abroad, especially in China, but elsewhere as well. And so there's, I think for some people there's this feeling that the KMT and the DPP, while they differ a lot in style, maybe in substance, at least in some areas, they're not that different. And the major area that I would say where they don't differ that much is their ability to take on the wealthy Taiwanese families that control, a disproportionate amount of the stock market here. These families, these people have they haven't faced any pressure from the government to raise wages, and I think any government, regardless of if they're blue or green, if they can pass something and they can make wages go up, then you're going to have a very, very popular party. And I think just when it comes to this aspect, I don't think people see a lot of difference between the two parties.
Before we talk more about the two parties, I want to backtrack a little bit to what you said about everybody's looking for you. Your editors are looking for you for the China story, and yet you're here. And I think in the past 3 years, we've seen more international media coming back to Taiwan.
That's true.
So how do we account for that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think during the Ma administration, for various reasons, especially primarily because of the more or less rapprochement with China, there wasn't a whole lot of news coming out of Taiwan. The sunflower movement was the major exception to that, but things were pretty quiet. There wasn't a lot of international interest in Taiwan, and then with the election of Tsai Ing-wen, that changed. Tsai Ing-wen's phone call to Donald Trump was probably a watershed moment where people were like, okay, Taiwan's a story again. And when you have more people writing about Taiwan, you will of course have China stories, but then people are here and they'll see other stories. The same-sex marriage story, that's been a big one. I think it took a while. It still hasn't sunk in to the outside world that there is no same-sex marriage in Taiwan, and a lot of people kind of misconstrued the Constitutional Court ruling as making it legal, but it's going to May of next year, I believe, is when the deadline for passing same-sex marriage legislation will arrive, and so it has to happen between now and then. The referendum questions today will either clarify or muddle how that goes. You could end up with a situation where you have, marriage equality, where same-sex marriages have the same legal standing as heterosexual marriages. You could also have a situation where it's a separate but equal arrangement where, civil unions, that kind of thing, that have happened in other countries. I think you're going to have, there are going to be some people that are upset one way or the other, but it's definitely one of those issues that it will dominate the headlines tomorrow once we know the outcomes of the referendums.
Did you pass by? Did you go to any voting booths today?
I was in Liujiangli, and I saw a very long line. It looked like about an hour-long wait, but people were patient, and it seemed like there's everyone's energized and wants to make their voice heard.
Yeah, somebody on my Facebook had a 2-hour wait. I don't know where he's voting from, to be honest. Yeah, I think I got really lucky. I only had to wait for 30 minutes, which was really long because last time I voted, I remember going in, I timed it because I was just so curious, especially you hear about how long it takes in the States to vote, how confusing it is. And so I kind of as an experiment. So I remember getting there and I timed myself, and by the time I got out, it was just 5 minutes. So
you were really lucky.
Well, that was that was 2 years ago, right? But today it was 30, which sounds like it was still really lucky. What about you?
I actually live in a quite remote area in the mountains, and today I had to wait for 40 minutes to my utter surprise. And the polling station is actually right next to a vegetable farm. But imagine in that kind of remote area, people, farmers, local residents queuing up, and I also saw some monks and nuns from neighboring temples also came to cast their ballots. So everything was really orderly, and it's all done in a very relaxed atmosphere. And the weather was gorgeous, and everybody was like having a little family outing, children waiting. So, it really gives you this atmosphere of very strong grassroots democracy. And people really care about this country. They care about who are going to represent them, and they care about the topics and issues on the referendum tickets.
Yeah, it's one thing I'm curious about. How much did the referendum? I heard there were 10 separate sheets of paper. I mean, are the lines longer because of the referendum, or is it a bigger turnout, or is it a little bit of both?
I think there's definitely a bigger turnout compared to the previous elections, but I think the fact that there are 10 referendum topics and you're given like 10 sheets of paper or ballots to cast, it definitely kind of delayed and prolonged the voting process.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't seen the numbers yet, and I'm hoping that, so we have tuning into Huashi here. I'm hoping that at some point they'll have the numbers for us as to what the voter turnout today was.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. But it was so orderly. It was beautiful. So there are 2 stages. What happened with us, I'm hoping it was the same. I'm assuming it's the same as you as well. But so you go, you show your ID. And last week we got in the mail our voter credentials, which had 2 pieces of paper. So one's white, one's pink. Mm-hmm. So at the first desk, you show them your ID, and they see that it matches with the white paper. Then the second person takes that and looks for your name on this massive list. And then it takes your chop. You have to bring your chop, your 印章.
Wow.
So yeah, it took me like 5 minutes at home just scrambling everything to look for my 印章. Mm-hmm. They get your 印章, and then they chop to have a record that you picked up.
Yeah,
ballots.
you can use your fingerprints as well.
You cannot.
Instead, yeah, you can use your fingerprints. Yeah, you just
We
get your
thought
fingers.
so.
You just get your fingers dirty.
That's
and
what we
messy.
thought, but then we couldn't find it in writing. So then I was looking for it.
Or you could do it.
Ah, okay.
So
that
next
reminds
time-
me. Yeah, that reminds me. There's a great story about how they used to. I don't know how true it is. I don't know if there's a record of it, but just kind of these stories that parents tell you, how votes used to be. Additional votes used to be made before voting booths were closed, and they call it playing the piano, because then the staff will just get their fingers dirty and print on the ballots.
Okay.
So now there's a specific rule that you can't do that on the.
No. I'm saying that when you are receiving the ballots,
Yeah,
you
for
don't need to
registering.
use your chop. You could use your fingerprints instead. But for actually casting the votes, fingerprints, you have to use that special seal used for casting your votes.
So after the seal, a third person then gives you the ballots, right? So you got one for mayor, one for city councilmen and women, and another one for 里长. Which
neighborhood warden or neighborhood chief.
So we want to talk later about what 里长 actually is and what they do, which is a very interesting position. Then the second stage, after you go into the booth, you've cast your vote. The second stage, then you do that process again, but with the referendums. So that's where I think that this year a lot of time spent on that. Except the third part. So for us there was a person who was picking up 10 pieces of paper, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Stack and give it to you. You go inside, you stamp your 10 pieces of papers. You come out, the 10 pieces of papers, they then need to be separated into 3 different boxes. So then people are counting in front of the boxes. So all that is taking up a lot of time. I would love to see figures later saying that voter turnout this year is a lot higher than before, but I don't know. It's hard to tell.
We don't know. We'll see tonight.
This is my first election, but from what I've heard and from what I saw, the turnout seems like it's quite high. And yeah, I was in the United States for the recent midterm elections, and it was a similar, and maybe I'm just choosing to feel it, but it feels like there's a lot of energy out there. There's people who they have differing opinions, but they want to make their voices heard, and yeah, it just seems like we're gonna see some high turnout figures tonight.
Did you go home to vote specifically? Did you 返乡投票?
I went home. I was seeing family as well, but I come from Kansas, and Chris Kobach is the is the Secretary of State there, and yeah, without getting too deep into American politics, I figured the safest way to make the easiest way to make sure that my vote was counted was to go and do it in person, and so when I see people doing that here, people going out and voting, it's a good feeling. It looks like people they care, and I'm really interested in how the referendum items turn out. But looking at the initial results coming in, it looks like there's going to be a lot of close races.
Yeah. Well, maybe some of our audiences don't know. The blue color represents KMT, which is the Nationalist Party. And the green color represents DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. And the black color we see is non-party affiliated. So now we're looking at Taichung City, Tainan City, and Kaohsiung City. And back to the screen, Taipei City, New Taipei City, and Taoyuan City. So we could see close call, neck to neck. It's a really exciting time.
Yeah, so here in Taipei, it looks like Ko Wen-je has a slight lead over Ding Shou-zhong, and Pa Sui-yao is far behind. There's a lot of concern that, not a lot of concern. There's some speculation that maybe Pa Sui-yao running for the DPP might take away enough votes from Ko Wen-je for Ding Shou-zhong of the KMT to win. Last election, Ko Wen-je was basically he didn't have any DPP opposition, so that's a bit of a difference. So if he wins this election, he'll look much stronger because he'll have beaten both parties, both major parties. But if he loses, there will probably be a lot of people on the green side of things who will be upset that the DPP didn't just sit this one out.
Yeah, well, also Taipei City mirror race is really important because, but traditionally it's a practicing ground or kind of a launching pad for future presidential candidates, and so anybody who runs in Taipei, who does well in Taipei, who has been a mayor in Taipei, then there's talks of, are you going to run for the president?
Yes, and Ko Wen-je, who is, if not the most, he's one of the most popular politicians in Taiwan. If he wins this, he'll be in a very good position to challenge Tsai for the presidency in 14 months' time. He hasn't said whether or not he'll run, but I think he definitely is thinking about it.
Yeah, but some say that if he wins this time, but just with a small margin, then he might not run because the stake is too high, and also without party endorsement. For a national level election, it might be much more difficult and challenging than just running a local election.
Right. Yeah. So and right now it looks like if he does win, I mean, it's still very early, but he's got a very slim lead over Ding Shou-zhong at the moment. So this could get very interesting later on. And then in New Taipei City, it looks like Hou Youyi has a fairly substantial lead over his opponent Su Zhenchang, And Ho Yo-i is he's one of those. He's along with Han Guoyu, who is running for the KMT down in Kaohsiung. They kind of fall into a similar camp with Ko Wen-je, where it's kind of like slightly outspoken, not always politically correct, to put it one way, and kind of like a maverick image. So there's and that kind of feeds into the mood that I'm getting, where people, they just want people who can get things done, and they're not so interested in hearing the same things that they've been hearing for the last few elections. They want people with fresh new ideas, or at least new styles. And Han Guoyu definitely is. I'm going to use the word. He's got a slightly Trumpian thing going on, including misogynistic comments. But it's. I don't think anybody was expecting him to be performing as strongly as he did in polls in the past month. He's really kind of caught people by surprise, and it looks like he's neck and neck with Chen Chi-mai, the DPP candidate in Kaohsiung. So that's going to be very interesting. And if so, discussing Han Guoyu, what's interesting about him is he very quickly went from becoming this hot candidate down in Kaohsiung to becoming almost like a national phenomenon. The pro-China media here, they've been giving him tons of free coverage. I was in Miaoli last weekend, and every restaurant I went into, it was Han Guoyu on the television. And he's been endorsing candidates and stumping for candidates all over the country. And even in Taipei, you look at KMT posters, a lot of the candidates, they're posing with Han Guoyu. So if he wins, and if the KMT does well in other places, you might see something similar with the KMT that happened with the Republican Party in the United States, where it gets kind of an outsider figure, even though he's a career politician. He hasn't really been figuring strongly into the national debate until recently. You could see the Han Guoyu-ification of the KMT, which will be interesting to see how that might work out. He seems very very focused on bringing in foreign investment into Taiwan, and the question is, how much of that will be coming from China? Where is he seeking this investment from? But he's 400 votes behind.
Even if he doesn't win the election, he still wins in a way, right? Now
True.
He's national attention. He's very respected now among his parties. He's in a good position.
Yeah.
Well, the KMT hasn't had a popular politician for some time, so they're he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, but some have said that Han Guoyu didn't just do so well in the debate with Chen Chi-mai. But how come it seems it didn't really affect his support rate so far? And as a foreign observer, what do you think are the major attractions of Han Guoyu that he could garner so much support and even making a kind of a national wave?
Well, I can't really speak for Taiwanese people. I really don't know what what the appeal is. But what I find really surprising is young people they've been very supportive of Han Guoyu, and the KMT has for some time now struggled to win over young voters. So as Emily noted, even if he doesn't win, you've got a popular, recognized face and someone who appeals to young Taiwanese people. I mean, the KMT would they'll definitely want to latch onto that and take advantage of this unexpected popularity that he's showing. in terms of the debates, maybe not everyone saw the debate. And, some people, it doesn't really matter to them how someone performs in a debate, or even what the substance of the debate is. It's just, they want change, and this would be a huge change, because the DPP has basically, this is the DPP heartland, Kaohsiung down in the south. The DPP has controlled Kaohsiung for the last 20 years.
Yes.
The Zuoying naval base is there. It's a very important part of the DPP's power base, and to lose that would be, it would be a message that basically, like, anything can happen. It has felt like the trend until recently has been a stronger DPP and a weaker KMT. And if Han Kuo-yu wins, that could be a change. But then there's also the argument that even no matter how the KMT performs this election, they're still going to be in trouble, because they haven't developed a light blue base. The deep blue base, the people who have a very strong Chinese identity, they're getting older and they're getting fewer. And so you have to expand on that. And it doesn't look like that's happening this election.
But the youth of these families are now coming out to vote for Han Kuo-yu. I think when I'm asked about, they say, oh, a lot of youth are behind Han Kuo-yu. What I've seen from kind of those around me who were from Kaohsiung was that it's not necessarily new. It's not necessarily that a group of youth have decided to turn against DPP to come out Han Kuo-yu. It's that traditionally the people who are, the voters who are more apathetic are now taking a stance.
Right.
Right. So it's exactly that population. Their families are now coming back to this.
Right. Yeah. And the internet has figured into this election, or into the campaigning in a very different way than before, because prior to this election, the DPP was generally the more organized, internet savvy party. And this time around, the DPP is, you could say the internet has turned on them. You have disinformation, so-called fake news campaigns, possibly originating from China, but it's very difficult to determine where where these memes and other things are coming from. You also have better organized KMT grassroots, doing their thing on the internet. So the DPP's kind of lost its advantage in that sphere. Overall, it's probably a good thing. I think the more competition you have, the more discussion and dialogue you have, the bigger the conversation is. It's generally better for a democracy.
Yeah, but we also noted that this may indicate kind of a emergence of newer ways for campaigning, together with the popularity of social media, etc. And DPP traditionally, or at least since the martial law was lifted for the last 30 years, they've been pretty good at organizing campaign rallies and creating new formats for campaign rallies, and really kind of stir up the atmosphere and all that, and they became expert for that. Like it's like choreography, and it's like a staged show, everything so carefully organized and prepared for, and the voters also know how to kind of interact with the MCs for these campaign rallies, and then KMT had to follow suit and copy these rallies. But looking at the election this time, it seems like KMT has developed, or is developing, kind of newer tactics and embracing social media, and they've been rather successful so far. Can we say it that way?
I think so, right.
I would agree with what you just said. I was passing by Katagalan Road last night, and it was the night before the election. Ding Shouzhong had a big rally there. There were lots of Republic of China flags waving everywhere, and lots of AIs, lots of older women who were campaigning against same-sex marriage. They were stopping. So at a red light near the rally, they were basically handing out leaflets to people on scooters. So I mean, they're definitely they're energized. I think the stronger than expected performance in polls by the KMT has also energized the green side of things, the green side of the populace to come out and make sure that they don't get complacent. One thing that I think has been overlooked in media reports about this election, including mine, would be that this is the first election where you have the DPP as the ruling party. You've had DPP presidency before, but the KMT was controlling the legislature. So this is the first time in the DPP's history since being founded in '86. The first time that they've been running the show, and so it's very easy to, as a challenger, as an outsider, to talk about how you can do things better. Now there's the DPP cannot do that. The DPP now has to show what it's done, and governing isn't easy. Ask anyone who's done it. This is going to be a referendum on the DPP and Tsai as much as it is just local issues as well. And it doesn't appear like they're getting clobbered, but it does seem like there are definitely a lot of people who are ready for a change. You've got Ho Yo-i who is looking fairly strong in New Taipei City. That would be a big pickup for the KMT. And Ding Shozhong is still very very much in his race with Ko Wen-je, with Pa Su-yao picking up some more votes, but also taking votes away from Ko Wen-je, presumably.
But Lin Jialong and Taichung still holding on. So for now.
And Zheng Wen-can in Taoyuan as well.
Yeah. Pretty good so far.
Yeah, he seems to be one of, in terms of governing and being able to show results. He seems to be one of the strongest mayors. I was expecting him to have a slightly larger lead, but yeah, it seems like he's one of the rising stars in the
definitely.
DPP.
It's worthy to mention that the mayors of Taichung City, Lin Jialong, and of Taoyuan City, Zheng Wen-can, they are both from the student movement generation, the so-called 学运世代 within the DPP.
Right.
So
would that be like the Wild Lily?
Yes.
Okay.
野百合 movement in 1989. So that's just 2 years after the martial law was lifted, and they were students back then, university students back then, and then they participated in this nationwide movement that kind of got a lot of the students together to stage protest against the remnants of martial law, the Penal Code, Article 100, etc., and also the fact that back then President Li Denghui appointed what's his name, Hao Longbing's father, Hao Bo-chun, as the premier. And then the students were against it because of his military background.
Right.
And,
There was also, my understanding of the Wild Lily movement is that there were also calls for actual democratic voting for the presidency. Li Denghui had been selected as president by members of the KMT.
In 96, he was elected directly by the people. But you were talking about before that.
In
first
in '89,
yeah,
it was his first. So he had taken over
but the National Assembly.
Yeah. He was elected by KMT members only, and it was like high-ranking KMT members. And students protested. So he was inaugurated, and the students had, I believe, protested for several days before his inauguration, and he met with 50 or so student representatives, and he talked to them about their, he asked what their demands were. One of them was open democratic elections, and here we are today. I think that's very cool. And it's worth noting that Taiwan is one of the few places to have a peaceful democratic revolution. And that's really one of those things that the outside world doesn't know as much as it should about Taiwan. And one of the things that it doesn't get is it didn't just become a democracy. People went out and made their voices heard and put their lives on the line. And it's very heartening to see people, taking advantage of, the right to vote. They're going out there and using it. It doesn't matter who they're voting for. It's just the act of voting is important in itself.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad we got to talk a little bit about how the old student leaders of past student movements, how we're now seeing them in our government. Later on at 7 o'clock, we'll have Lev Nachman on the show later to talk to us more about the new generation of student movements and some of the leaders and some of the political parties that have come out of that. So
that'll be interesting. Yeah. Lev knows his stuff.
Yeah. I want to throw back to Chris, something you touched on a little bit when we were talking about Hungary just now, about China specifically, and possible election interference. There's been a lot of anxiety about that, and I know that you had an article about it 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Globally, there probably isn't anybody who can have an election without talking about fake news and election interference from any outside forces.
Yeah.
Looking at Taiwan and knowing some of the context of some of the tactics that's been used by other governments for other countries, have you seen any signs of any such tactics being used here? You read and write and in Mandarin.
There definitely seems to be some content spreading on the internet that's coming from China. You can hide your IP address or you can change your IP address, but there are definitely some Chinese IP addresses that have been linked to some of the memes and fake news, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, that have shaped the political discourse here in the past year. There's 33 cases being investigated by the Ministry of Justice's Investigation Bureau of alleged illegal campaign funding, funds coming in from China for candidates, presumably not DPP candidates. China definitely, they may not be, if they are supporting any candidates, it's very. We'll see what the investigation uncovers, but the KMT has long been their preferred dialogue partner. If you're going to have to deal with a democratically elected government in Taiwan as China, you're going to be most comfortable dealing with the KMT, which is the China Nationalist Party. And Ma Ying-jeou, he accepted the so-called 1992 consensus, which it's basically to summarize it, it's this notion that Taiwan and China are part of the same country, and they just they can have different ideas of what that country is, but this is it's basically the starting the first stepping stone towards some sort of union or unification. And the KMT lately has not really been able to play that card too much, because it doesn't do well with voters. People don't want to hear most people are happy to be Taiwan and to continue being Taiwan. People, of course, there are loads of people that would love to have Taiwan be a normal country recognized by the rest of the world. I think you saw at the Golden Horse Awards last weekend, Fu Yue, when she won for best documentary. She was crying, and I think she moved a lot of people when she made this, when she voiced her hope for an independent Taiwan that can just be a normal country. There are also, China will not accept that, and so there are people that just they don't want to rock the boat too much, but there just doesn't seem to be a huge base of support for the 92 consensus, and it'll be interesting to see what tack the Kuomintang takes with regard to that in next year's campaigning in the election in January of 2020.
Yeah, I think 6 months ago, I was thinking about disinformation and fake news for this election, but I think because it is a much of a local election, a lot of things are not as obvious. So I'm curious to see how, netizens are going to see 2 years from now, but also what kind of new methods there's going to be.
Right.
The internet grows very quickly nowadays. In a year's time, yeah.
Well, one thing some of the experts I've spoken with in Taiwan and outside of Taiwan, one thing they've said is, regardless of how this election turns out, China will. Taiwan is a testing ground for Chinese disinformation, for many things that China tries to do, United Front work, disinformation, fake news, what have you, and so they will be able to assess the level, the degree of success that their efforts had, and adjust accordingly. They'll tweak their algorithms, or how they target smaller groups within the electorate. There's a lot of people that think China's been working to pit the deep green against the light green. So people who are very pro, like independence now kind of people. They feel, and potentially justifiably so, that the Tsai administration has they haven't. They're more or less a Republic of China government rather than a Taiwan government, and it's there's impatience, I think, on the deep green side of things. So you've got Lee Deng-hui and former President Lee Deng-hui, former President Chen Shui-bian, and several other notable political figures here who are trying to get a referendum in April on changing Taiwan's name and changing Taiwan's constitution, which right now the referendum law doesn't allow for that. So there would have to be presumably a referendum on changing the referendum law. So it's Taiwan. A lot of people sometimes they're critical of the democracy here, and they'll say Taiwan 太民主了, and it's Taiwan's too democratic, and that would be getting into having referendums on the referendum law. It's starting to get meta. But I think there's Taiwan. It's in a very difficult and precarious position, and I think the Tsai administration, they can't really make the bold changes that the deep green side wants to see, even if maybe deep down they would like to. I think you have to keep the U.S. relationship in mind. The Tsai, definitely President Tsai, she and Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, they're very concerned with keeping the U.S. on side, and once, especially with Donald Trump as president, you don't want to irritate him. And Taiwan has been very low key. there's no American bases here that he can complain about. So Taiwan buys weapons from the U.S. So all in all, I think the Trump administration, they've been very supportive of Taiwan. You have a lot of people high up in the State Department that are friends of Taiwan, as they're called here. So it looks like Taiwan's situation is pretty solid. The U.S.-China relationship is deteriorating, and so I think, and Taiwan is getting talked about a lot more by both Beijing and Washington, with China saying, back off, and the U.S. saying, we're not going to back off. And so it's between now and the presidential election, I think, looking past the election today, you're probably going to have, every news report, talks about rising tensions, across the Taiwan Strait. But I think it's been fairly steady for the most part. But I think you actually could see some rising tensions in the next in the run up to the presidential election. So how the Tsai administration handles that, how the Trump administration handles that, that'll be important to voters. But getting back to China and disinformation and military threats is definitely part of the disinformation. The PLA, they've done a great job of getting their threatening message out into Taiwanese media. All the drills that they've been running, the exercises, the Liaoning aircraft carrier circling Taiwan. They've been putting out videos and photos, and Taiwanese media just throws it right up there on the screen, and they don't even always checked to make sure that actually happened. So this is, I think, one area where Taiwanese media could definitely improve is a little more fact checking. You don't want to be doing any signal amplification for PLA propaganda efforts. So if anything, I think this election cycle will hopefully be a wake up call to not just politicians but also to local media here.
But in terms of international perception, do you think that direct channels from the Thai administration has helped? And we're talking social media direct channels to netizens of the world, right? How I think over the past year, Tsai has vamped up her Twitter presence. We have regular posts, and it's a growing account from MOFA as well.
Yeah.
Has it helped?
Well, it can't hurt. I mean, I think they've done a very good job of, trying to present Taiwan in a positive light. And Ko Wen-je also, he's been a lot more active on Twitter. Tsai, I think a couple years ago, was at 80,000 Twitter followers, and now she's at 300,000. She's actually done quite well in Japan. They post in Japanese sometimes, and I think a lot of Japanese politicians follow her and retweet her Japanese tweets. I think her Japanese language tweets are the most widely viewed and shared. And the Japan relationship is obviously, after the U.S., the most, it's one of the top two relationships, foreign relationships for the Tsai administration. So there's obvious direct benefits for that. The Trump call aside, some of the most important interactions that you've got, between Tsai and another head of state, elected, Trump was president-elect when he spoke with Tsai. So that was one way of kind of, that allowed kind of a face-saving way for China to, wag its finger without saying that a line has been crossed, or without feeling compelled to take some sort of drastic action, I guess. But the natural disasters in Taiwan and Japan over the past year, you've had basically social media exchanges of condolences and support between Tsai and Prime Minister Abe in Japan. And I think there's in Japan you've got Taiwan is a former colony, so there's that link to Japan. I think in general you have a lot of support in Japan for Taiwan and its cause. The 2020 Olympics, they're going to be in Tokyo, and there's a Japanese started or a Japanese initiated petition to allow Taiwan to participate as Taiwan rather than as Chinese Taipei, which is a place that does not exist. But for various reasons, that's what Taiwan has to participate in Olympic competitions as, and other competitions take their cue from the IOC. But there's that's another referendum question that'll be interesting to see how it goes. There's been a lot of discussion lately. Some Taiwanese athletes have come out and said, let's not rock the boat. We're allowed to participate in the Olympics. That should be good enough. And it's there that does make some sense. It would be tragic for Taiwan to somehow not be able to participate in the Olympics. One would hope it wouldn't come to that. But it does also make sense that you want to be called by something that is at least a little bit more accurate than Chinese Taipei.
I think there is a what do you call that? The cup, which right before every Olympics, right? The athletes.
The Olympic torch.
The torch goes around the world, and they light up a cup at every city. I think there's still one in front of 小巨蛋.
Okay.
From 1968, I believe, which was in Japan, if I remember correctly. So I think that was one of the last times that we had participated as Republic of China.
Wasn't there? I'm almost 100% sure that there was one time that the Republic of China competed as Taiwan, and they protested. So
who protested?
The Taiwanese athletes, because back then there was this very strong claim to still be the government of China, and so there's a great photo of Taiwanese athletes saying, "We are not Taiwan. We are the Republic of China." So it's interesting how things change over the years. Yeah.
Even though this time it's a local election, but we do see sentiment of this national identity issue kind of doing its tricks for the elections. And if the results turn out to be indicating DPP's loss, do you think there's a possibility that Tsai's kind of moderate, cautious approach on not rocking the boat, and then how she handles Taiwan, China, U.S., and Japan relations, the dynamics, would be affected, and maybe we'll observe maybe during the next month or 2 months, depending on how, inside the DPP, how they rearrange itself, reorganize itself, and all that, to decide whether our approach to China would change.
Before you answer that, I just wanted to issue a quick correction.
Okay.
It was the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo.
Okay.
Continue. Apologies.
Fact checking is great. Well, Tsai, I think she's calm, sober, focused. I don't think she's going to change anything just because of some setbacks in local elections. The DPP was in shambles not that long ago, and she oversaw its resurrection. after getting trounced by the KMT.
That's 10 years ago.
Yeah,
2008.
Yeah. And she basically said, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z and rebuild, and she did exactly that. So I think she's got a very steady approach to things, and this, while to some degree it might be a progress report for the Tsai administration, what you still have to look at is what other alternatives are there to the Tsai administration in the presidential election in 2020, and it looks like potentially Ko Wen-je, potentially Han Kuo-yu, but the idea of Han Kuo-yu winning the presidency seems a bit far-fetched at this point. I mean, he's pretty hong. He's that's red in Chinese. He's hot at the moment. But when it comes to the idea, thinking about him debating Tsai, I have trouble imagining her losing to him in a debate, unless you get a political environment in Taiwan where facts don't matter and what you say doesn't matter. It's just what kind of show you put on, and so hopefully Taiwan doesn't move in that direction, as we've seen other democracies around the world do.
I would love to see a debate between Tsai and Han. Yeah. Chris, you have to go. Understand
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I know that you have an article to write.
Yes,
so.
I'm going to get back to my computer.
But before we go, Chris, where can people find you on social media?
Well, I'm primarily on Twitter. So my handle is my Chinese name, He Guisen, so Heguisen, the pinyin spelling. I lived in China before I was here. But yeah, I tweet a lot about Taiwan, and I share a lot of your posts, your insightful posts. But yeah, please feel free to follow me and join the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
And if you're just joining us now or in the last hour, we are live from Taipei at Radio Taiwan International for the special elections coverage. I'm Emily, and this is Trini.
Hi.
We're going to take a 1-minute break before we welcome our next guest, who is Nate Maynard, to talk about green economy. But meanwhile, Nate, welcome to sit, and we're just gonna take a moment here.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. Sit.
Have my books, have my notes.
Yeah,
have
get
my
comfortable.
single-use coffee cup, unfortunately, but
Do we need to adjust his microphone?
talk into the microphone. Can you hear me? Good. Do I need to lean in? Does it need to go up, down?
Nate's very tall, and so there's a couple of adjustments that we'll need to do.
Need to bring a smaller chair in. Okay. Cool.
So Nate is a consultant at the Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research,
That's right.
and you work on green economy.
That's one of the things I do. Green economy, circular economy, all the economies. Originally, I was a natural resource economist. That's how I first came to Taiwan as a Fulbright Research Fellow.
What is the institute? Can you? I'm not
SEER?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it calls itself the Brookings of Asia, but I don't think that that's necessarily an apt comparison because not many people know about it yet. It was established in 1989 when the U.S. Cut ties with Taiwan, 1987, and this was set up as a formal think tank to try and research both what was happening in China economically and also how Taiwan could develop itself economically further. So that was the main focus.
Yeah, is it government sponsored?
It is a non-profit, non-partisan research institute, but it was established partially by the government. So we work on government grants and contracts, but I am not a government employee, which is why they let me work there.
And the work you do there?
And the work I do there, we're part of the Center for the Green Economy, so we work on grants related to anything environmentally. When we first started, it was on green trade, helping Taiwanese companies sell green products abroad, research, environmental economics, how much is a coral reef worth. We also do things. Recently, we launched a new partnership with the RE100, which is to help Taiwanese companies commit to using 100% renewable energy. So I'm not biased against nuclear, but I am scientifically supportive of having renewables.
We will get to that for sure. Since you're here for the next half hour to an hour, we're going to talk a lot about the environment and nuclear.
Great.
Yeah, but before we go to that, would you like to talk about a little bit about the 10 topics on our referendum? Because one of them is about nuclear, and some issues are about our energy policy.
Yeah, I think there's 4 different referendums that are related to the environment. There's a referendum on having food come from Japan, from the Fukushima area that may or may not be tainted with radiation.
That's which number is that?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. We'll get to that later.
There's also a referendum to ban thermal coal plants. There's a referendum to reduce thermal coal plants by 1% per year. Then there's, of course, the confusingly worded referendum to ban the ban on nuclear power.
Yeah. So maybe it would be helpful to read out those topics.
I thought you have them memorized.
Yeah.
You'd think as an environmental scholar, but...
Okay. I found out on number 7, the wording is, do you agree the electricity output of thermal power plants should be lowered by at least 1% per year on average? And then number 8, do you agree that Taiwan should establish an energy policy that undertakes not to construct any new coal-fired power plants or generators or expand existing facilities, including the expansion of the Shenao power plant? And then number 9, do you agree the government should maintain the ban on imports of agricultural products and food from areas in Japan affected by the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant disaster on March 11, 2011, including Fukushima, Ibaraki, Gunma, Tochigi, and Chiba prefectures? And what's the last item? Number 16. Do you agree that abolishing the first section of Article 95 of the Electricity Act means abolishing the provision that all nuclear energy-based power generating facilities shall cease to operate by 2025? So, Chris,
quite a mouthful.
Yeah, Nate, what does that mean?
What do they mean?
What do they mean? Yeah.
So people have focused a lot on number 16 because that is the one that people consider to be legally binding. And I can get into why I don't actually think that's going to have much of an impact on Taiwan's energy development.
In plain speak, number 16 is...
In plain speak, number 16 is, should we use nuclear power past 2025? Because all of the existing plants, the first 3, their 40-year licenses are going to basically expire by 2025 anyway. So what this policy was saying is, let's not use nuclear after that point. This also effectively prohibits the 4th plant from ever reaching completion. But at this stage, that also seems unlikely.
The 4th plant.
Yeah, the Longmen plant that was marked with controversy, and then after the Fukushima disaster faced massive opposition and was eventually mothballed. The total cost for that project was $10 billion, and that continues to grow because for each year that it's mothballed, it costs another 1.3 billion NT. So I just switched monetary units, but...
This is the same plan that's been in dispute since the mid-90s.
Yes.
Yeah, they've been trying to build it, I think, since 1986. Which is a long time to try and build a rather small percentage of Taiwan's energy portfolio.
I feel like it's come a full circle for me because in the mid-90s, on nuclear power plant number 4, whether to continue or not, there was a movement for the abolishment of it. And that was the first time I ever learned about the concept of a referendum, that there is a system perhaps where the people get to vote on one issue and say yes or no. But I was still quite young then. What do you remember about that time?
I think it's really the first time that people started voicing their concern about nuclear power plant. And yes, Emily, you're absolutely right that it's about that time that people start thinking about using referendum as a means to express their concerns or opposition or support for certain topics. And actually, I'm under the strong impression that after the Fukushima incident, that majority of Taiwan people have become strongly against nuclear power. So I couldn't help but thinking that this item 16 about the nuclear energy-based power generating facilities coming back is more politically motivated than actually representing the wish of the people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say absolutely right. All of the referendums are that they're politically motivated because none of them, well, let's talk about the food example. The public should not really be voting on what is safe food. There are environmental regulators, there's an EPA, there's Food and Safety Administration. They're the ones who should be really doing that. You know, whether your opinion is that you think that food is safe doesn't matter because the average person is not a scientist and they're not a food scientist, they're not doing those tests. Similarly, and maybe in the reverse context, Taiwanese people actually don't have the authority to choose their power right now. And Taipower is a black box in terms of power generation because Taipower is a state-run monopoly that's been doing that since its creation. So Taiwanese people have never been able to choose their energy. So in some ways, these referendums are like logic traps because you're basically framing the argument as being either nuclear or coal, when in reality, there are other choices. There are renewables, there's natural gas, there's energy efficiency.
You were saying that Taiwanese people are not allowed to choose their energy, which is true to a certain extent, but the very fact that during current President Tsai's election campaign before she got elected in 2016, one of her campaign platform was on green energy. Mm-hmm. So she made the proposal of having renewable energies reach 20% by year 2025, that's replacing right. nuclear power. So people voted for her, and then she had that policy proposal. So I think to a certain extent, Taiwanese people are trying to choose their energy through voting for her.
Yeah, there's pent-up demand because I'm from California. We have multiple power utilities that we can choose from. We have the option to choose if we want to purchase green electricity or not. Actually, in Taiwan, there is a renewable energy certificate program called TREC, where theoretically individuals and companies can purchase renewable electricity. But up until actually this year, that process was extremely cumbersome. I've met many people who have been unable to buy green energy as an individual. And then also for companies, it's quite challenging because a lot of those credits, due to the lack of renewable energy in Taiwan, go to large companies that have legal mandates and requirements mm-hmm. to buy them, such as Taipower or TSMC.
I know that in January 2017, we passed the amendment of the Electricity Act mm-hmm. on enabling the future unbundling of Taipower,
right,
and then also enabling the green energy to kind of be acquired by people, and it would take kind of priority when it comes to connecting to the grid or power supply.
Right.
Yeah, so I do think there's a positive change there in terms of embracing the global trend of sustainability, in embracing the green renewable energy. But should this referendum topic 16 mm-hmm. Pass, what do you think would be the impact?
Well, so it's really good you brought that up because now companies are free to establish their own power plants. Before, you could not create a solar farm. You could not create a wind power farm. And likewise, you could not create your own nuclear power plant. So theoretically, people would be able to create their own plants. However, if you look at the economics of nuclear reactors, there's a significant amount of insurance risk that the state has to take on. To my knowledge, there really aren't any private nuclear power plants that exist because of the scale of investment required, the regulatory complications, and those types of risks. So even if this referendum passes, it's unlikely that Taipower is even going to want to keep building nuclear power plants. For the fourth plant, I believe it was in 2015, the head of Taipower said, if we're not able to build this nuclear power plant, we will go bankrupt, because they had invested so much money into this project. And that to me says that, okay, we have wind and solar that has continued to decrease in price over the past 10 years in ways that are simply unprecedented. And if that trend continues, then renewable energy in Taiwan is probably going to be far cheaper than nuclear ever will be. And it will probably even be cheaper than coal if you take into account things like the social cost of carbon, air pollution, health risks, which are quite significant. So now Taiwan can make its own decisions. People can build their own power plants. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that in the next few years. We're already seeing it with the bids for the feed-in tariffs on wind turbines.
So, but what would need to happen? Because so far we don't have enough alternative means. Correct.
Right.
What would need to happen on a national level, on a policy level, on consumer behavior, or from private? Ooh.
Sure. I mean, there was two historical blockages that were preventing renewable energy in Taiwan. The first was Taipower was the monopoly. So people could ask for renewable energy, but Taipower go, we have a priority to deliver cheap, reliable energy consistently, which is fair. I don't want to blame them for that. But that prevented them from ever developing renewables, because the natures of renewables are that sometimes it's not sunny, sometimes it's not windy. There are ways of designing the grid to mitigate that, but if that's not your priority, you won't do it. The other barrier, and actually what is still the strongest barrier in Taiwan, are fossil fuel subsidies. The fact that the electricity price in Taiwan is set at a certain price. Taiwan has the fourth lowest industrial electricity price in the world. So because Taiwan has such low electricity prices, you have basically no financial incentive to develop your own sources of power, because you can just hook up to the grid, and you have no incentive to save energy. So that's why Taiwan uses so much energy when other similar countries, Japan, Germany, use significantly less, because their electricity prices are 3 times higher. So you have no reason to turn off the AC, and at a factory level, you have no reason to conserve energy, because you would lose money doing that, even though you're saving the country potentially millions of kilowatt hours.
I think you mentioned Germany. I think Germany is one of the success cases in a transition to renewables. Right? Is that correct?
Exactly.
Can you tell us more about that?
Germany was the main inventor and user of feed-in tariffs. And so a feed-in tariff is where you pay a certain amount of money per kilowatt hour of that electricity that's used. And so when you do that, you subsidize that renewable energy producer. So we have always subsidized coal, natural gas, and oil, but we just did it many decades ago, so people forget that happened. So with these modern feed-in tariffs, you can reward projects to increase their scale, and you can change the feed-in tariff. So if you want to have solar in an area that's historically not connected to the grid, you can do that. We're seeing that a lot now in Southeast Asia. Thailand, very recently, in fact, just last year, achieved over 3,000 megawatts of solar, and they did that through feed-in tariffs. And they're able to do that to communities that were never connected to the grid, because it incentivizes producers to improve those outputs.
But for those of us who are not as familiar with it as you are, if a traditional energy source is all coal or nuclear, what is the balance between the traditional source with the renewables? What does California look to now, or where's Germany at in terms of?
Right. I believe that for California, it depends on the season, because during the winter months when California is using less electricity, it's actually exporting its energy surplus to Arizona and adjacent states. And that's because of all the solar energy and the fact that electricity demand in California is down. Every energy mix is a political question, ultimately. What type of energy do you want to support? So I wouldn't say there's like an ideal ratio other than 100% renewables, But that in turn requires changing the grid significantly. You need a grid that allows you to be able to, let's say your home has solar panels on it, send that electricity to your neighbor. Right now, Taiwan's grid is not set up to do that in many places. You also need the regulatory environment to support that. For companies, you need purchase power agreements. So companies need to be able to buy
to sell power.
To be able to buy and sell power, right? So that's being developed now in Taiwan, and I think that's a more important question than what types of energy. It's, are you creating a good policy foundation that's going to allow a diversity of energy types to thrive? We have so many options: geothermal, tidal, biomass, anaerobic digestion. But the question always, in Taiwan anyway, is just nuclear or coal or solar, which is not really the question.
And also wind.
And now wind, yeah. Wind is exploding in Taiwan. And I think that the government is seeing this and realizing that Taipower especially, we don't need to build power plants anymore. We invite people, we set the incentives, we control the grid, we control the power lines, and we leave it up to someone else to do it. Taipower likes that because it's lower risk.
Definitely.
Yeah. Much less risky than a
they just
nuclear plant.
buy power, buy electricity directly from the private power generators. So it's the power generators, the private ones, that are shouldering all the risks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have a question for you guys. Do you know, like, what sector in Taiwan uses the most energy?
Industrial?
Yeah, good. Wow. Okay, you're rare. Most people don't get that right away. But yeah, industry uses more than half of the power in Taiwan.
And the electricity price that they pay is lower than the household.
Right. So really, you should move
price.
into a factory if you wanted to save money.
So let's look at the ballot counting. It's still neck to neck for Taipei between Ding Shouzhong and Ko Wen-je, and in Kaohsiung between Chen Qimai and Han Kuo-yu. And in Taichung, it looks like Lin Jialong is heading just a little bit. And in New Taipei City, looks like KMT is winning.
Yeah, this is kind of nerve-wracking now. It's been 2.5 hours since 4 o'clock, since the votes started counting, and now I'd say most places are still very much neck to neck, which is very, very nerve-wracking. Aside from the couple of places you talked about, and Kaohsiung, it's still very head-to-head with Hungary not pulling ahead, but by just a little bit.
Yeah. And even though our TV screen here is only showing the ballot counting for the 6 major cities in Taiwan, but actually today we had the election on local level, including the smallest administrative unit called village level, and also neighborhood wardens.
The Lijiang.
Yes, and also city councils, township leaders, etc., etc. So it's not just for the big cities, but it's nationwide local elections.
Nate, are you familiar with the Lijiang, the concept of the neighborhood warden, the village chief?
I don't know mine. I've heard the term. It hasn't. I don't. No one really talks to me in my neighborhoods. I'm not really involved in the political discussions.
You live in Taipei.
I live in Taipei. Yeah, I live in Zhongzheng district, right on the border between that and Wanhua. My neighborhood's nice, so whoever is in charge is doing something right.
Okay, Li is the smallest administrative unit in the city, and the chief of a Li is called Li Zhang. And they really serve the community. They're the person that you go to when the street lamp doesn't function, or when you have rats roaming about at your house. Sometimes you call the Li Zhang saying, hey, who should I talk to, or which phone number should I call? Or they're the ones who kind of know who are the more disadvantaged families in the neighborhood and who are the elderlies who need care, things like that. So it's really the person that is closest to you. in your kind of a day-to-day life.
How do I find this person?
Well, you could check on the website.
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
and then find out from where you live, from your address, which li you belong to, and then look for li-zhang. And so they deal with mainly community level issues. Like,
But the Li is not very big, right? So without going online, you could technically walk along your neighborhood, alley to alley, and you'll find the Li's office is normally on the first floors of inside some alley normally. Unless,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
they'll
not
say,
where I live.
Well,
My li is really big.
you have to drive
Yes.
cliff to cliff.
Yes.
I'll just walk on the streets and yell out Li Zhang until.
I think so. Yeah, I feel like I've walked past many Lijiang offices at other neighborhoods, and you can always tell because there's a sign that says
Okay.
Lijiang.
I'm gonna do that because we
Yeah.
have a park by my house, and there's a lot of litter, and there's also some mango trees, and I want to
Okay.
both get rid of the litter and know if I can eat the mangoes on the
Yeah.
mango trees. So
Well, you could definitely talk to your li-zhang
Sounds like a
because
Lijiang
they
problem.
would deal with issues like complaints on road condition.
Okay.
And then sometimes they organize the neighborhood a team to do night patrol or neighborhood sanitation, and then some
Great.
broadcasting system would be installed in the li, and the li-zhang would broadcast and reminding people like, okay, we'll do the sanitation on this day in the afternoon, so please make sure close your windows, etc., etc. Things like that.
now I'm thinking that maybe I've been getting these messages and just was very confused what the microphones were saying.
Yeah, they make announcement, or they would organize like a outing for the elderly, and then you just pay kind of a nominal fee. So they're there really to serve you. And the way they campaign is really, I find it really cute. For example, in my li, the li-zhang candidate would kind of get on his scooter and tail behind the garbage collecting trucks, and then hand out little goodies such as like a tissue paper packet with his name on it, and with his name and picture on it, or like a small dish sponge, or
We have
even
a
one,
dish sponge.
Okay.
yeah, or one or two garbage bags, or like a small fan, a handheld fan.
Those are
and
useful.
these goodies, according to the election law, it has to be within NT $30.
I think handing out trash bags at a trash truck is a brilliant campaign. I would do that.
So you haven't been getting goodies, it seems.
No, I don't get any goodies. I also don't take any goodies because I don't want to create more waste. I don't want to be picking up. I like the Kleenexes that they hand out, but part of me thinks it's just a little bit more trash. We could just use a handkerchief.
As a foreigner live in Taiwan, and I wonder, do you also tail behind the garbage truck and then try to do your garbage with a special designated garbage bags,
Oh yeah.
etc.?
Oh yeah. I probably tail garbage trucks more than most foreigners.
Okay.
Garbage was my main research interest when I first came to Taiwan.
Okay.
So I've been fascinated by the culture around garbage trucks.
The music they play,
the music,
the
but
German
then
classical
the
music.
micro communities that exist there. Because you have basically migrant workers, old people, young people,
Yeah.
just everybody's there. You have a lot of great conversations at the garbage truck.
And
Maybe you had an entire podcast episode about the garbage truck.
Yes,
Is that right?
yeah, because a lot of people don't realize that Taiwan is a leader in waste management, and that goofy garbage truck is one of the reasons why, because people have to pay to throw away their garbage. And you can see little micro examples of this. You go to the garbage truck, and maybe like a grandma will see that I have like a piece of recycling that I didn't know was recycling in my garbage bag, and she'll take it out. Or if you bring a garbage bag and it's not maximally full, they will sometimes take your garbage bag because they know that they can get more value out of your garbage bag. And so it's a win for me because I don't have to wait for the garbage truck, and it's a win for them because they get to maximize that garbage bag space.
Yeah, and then it's also a very efficient way to manage waste, and then
Right.
also allowing certain people when they when they try to make a living out of the recycled items, like the garbage collecting point is the place where they could go and get the stuff that they need.
Right, and that's one sign that recyclables in Taiwan are appropriately priced. You have people there waiting to collect the recyclables, and that's why Taiwan has a multi-billion-dollar recycling industry that it built in just 10 years, because all the incentives were right. Obviously, there's some problems, right? Like there's like welfare issues, but in general, it's much better than other places in Asia, and it's actually much better than where I'm from, California. So hard for me to really complain about the waste management that Taiwan is doing.
I wanted to ask you about the sushi from Fukushima.
Oh, okay.
Do you eat it?
Do I eat sushi?
Do you eat sushi from Fukushima? I mean,
I don't seek it out,
Yeah.
but maybe it's there. Well, so the thing with radiation and the thing with pollution in the ocean is that there's this phrase that all environmental engineers and environmental scientists learn, which is that the solution to pollution is dilution. So something is only a pollutant if it's highly concentrated. So because the ocean is so large, it's very easy for that pollution to spread out. But in spreading out, it reduces its environmental impact. So I'm not so worried about the radiation from the fish from Fukushima. I'm more worried about the mercury, the plastic that fish has consumed. I'm worried about the other routine environmental problems with consuming marine food, harmful algae blooms. So the radiation is not my primary concern. My primary concern would be harmful fishing practices that are going on, perhaps slave labor in the fishing boats. I'm not one to be overly afraid of food scares, at least in Taiwan, because when I first arrived, there was the gutter oil scandal, which was very different than living in China, where people would just make gutter oil jokes, where it was just like, it was known that there would be food contamination. But in Taiwan, there seems to be a very strong movement to have clean food or local food or organic food. There's a lot of great local farms in Taiwan. To answer your question shortly, I'm not worried about the sushi. I think there's much other serious environmental problems with eating sushi than radiation.
so as for the referendum question today, whether the government should maintain the ban on the imports of the sushi.
I'm going to vote no. If I was somehow able to vote in this referendum.
But
Taiwan's voting age. Do you want to talk about that now? Or do you want to
sure,
continue?
no, that's okay, sure.
Okay.
I think I'm old enough to vote. I'm just not Taiwanese.
Because you look
can
very
naturalize.
There's one interesting thing for this election is that the voting age is set at 20 instead of 18, but for voting on referendum, it's 18.
So you could go and vote, and the only thing you could vote on would be referendums.
Correct.
If you're not 20.
If you're not 20.
Yeah.
That just feels rude. I don't know.
So there has been debates on whether to lower the voting age, but so far the bar is still set at 20.
Well, in the U.S., you can vote at 18. I think that's a good age.
Yeah, because people argue that if you're legally liable, if you commit criminal offense at age 18, you're treated as an adult.
Right.
But then how come you can't vote until you're 20? So
yeah, and
that has been quite a debatable issue these past several years.
Yeah, I'm really interested in finding out. I mean, later on, I'm going to go on all the TV channels and look for the TV stations that have tracked down the 18, 19, almost 20-year-olds who have gone out to vote today without being able to vote, and the for the offices. Kind of, just what I really want to ask them. What, obviously, I want to hear that they say, I believe in taking part in the democracy, and also I believe in the questions, so I want to go and make my vote. But yeah, I'm really interested in hearing from those people.
And that'd be really interesting, because maybe you could track that to what elections are going to be like next, right? Because these people who are 18 now will be 20. And clearly the referendums have strong political party correlations.
Yeah.
So you
Yes.
could, and maybe some more intelligent political analyst than I could maybe figure out what that's going to be like.
I'm slightly sad that we keep talking about the referendum because it's a really good topic. However, the votes just are not being counted at all for the referendum. I think results for the referendum are not expected to come in until very, very, very late tonight.
Yes.
So stay up. Drink more coffee.
We have 10 topics on the referendum and so many tickets to count. Let's look at Taipei City now. Neck to neck still. And
Wow.
Taichung, Linjiang
has fallen behind.
50,000 behind.
Suzhentang for Taipei, still falling behind.
Taoyuan's pretty steady.
Chen Qimai is just holding on. At every hour, every time we turn to the TV, he's just holding on.
Do we know how many people are reporting? Like, what percentage of the votes have been counted yet?
No,
Don't know.
don't.
Don't know. Don't know.
So I'm curious about your general impressions and overall impressions of the campaign method and the kind of the loud noise, all the banners flying around and this really colorful and sometimes noisy broadcasting and all these little goodies that have been handed out, and then probably seeing candidates with their very shiny color vests with their number and their name on it and waving at people at crossroads. I mean, when you see those, do you see those in California where you're from, or I mean, what's your overall impression?
Yeah, definitely don't see anything like that in California. It's funny because this election is actually kind of normal to me now, because when I first came to Taiwan, that was 5 years ago. So I was here for those other midterm elections, and those ones, and I was in Pingdong County at the time because I was living next to the aquarium doing coral reef research. And so those elections seemed way crazier to me in the South, because you'd have like a big tract of land. There'd be kind of go-go dancers. There'd be old men drinking what I thought was alcohol just outside. And there'd be the campaign candidates on stage screaming or singing and that, so that was a lot. And so now seeing this, I'm like, okay, these banners, there's drums.
So you're
it's
used
annoying,
to it.
but I'm used to it. The one thing that I think is strange is that I'm told that at the end of the campaign season, the candidates will go on stage, oftentimes with their families, and they will cry, or they will like thank the audience. Do people still do this? Was I lied to? Or they'll kind of like break down and say like, I worked so hard, like I tried so hard.
I think few of them still do, and then in the old days, some of them would even kind of make like a strong vow or a swear with slicing the throat of a chicken and to swear something.
Wow.
Or like having their hair shaved off to kind of to show a strong determination or something.
Wait, tell me more about this. I'm fascinated.
Well, I've read about it. I mean, I'm fascinated by that too. I mean, I couldn't understand that kind of strong emotion and emotional appeals. I mean, it doesn't work for me. But
because I feel like in the U.S. that would not fly.
Yeah,
well, maybe now, who knows? But before, certainly, like if you yell too loud, then you're out. But in Taiwan, people are crying, and there seems like there's a lot more drama. I see in the campaign photos, I see people wearing like ancient warrior garbs, and there's like one woman with a sword, and
just
people
to
wear
attract
doctor's
your
robes
attention,
or like karate gear. Someone should turn these into trading cards. I mean, there's a market for that.
I thought about taking, no, not trading cards, but just collecting photos of them. I think it's still pretty possible. I've seen a lot of photos on social media. I think Chris, when he was down in Miaoli, he took some photos of them, and other people from Taipei then contributed. And I like to, now after election, to go back and find all these photos, because there's some very creative ones, and it keeps it interesting.
I mean, I'm just happy to see elections in Taiwan, and for people to be excited, and for people to protest and go to rallies and express their motivation for democracy, because the U.S. is so large, it's so spread out, it's hard to see that same kind of political passion concentrated like it is in Taiwan. So regardless of the outcomes, it's exciting, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm also happy to physically be here to talk about the elections.
Did you go to a rally this time around?
I didn't go to a rally, but I have been to environmental protests, which can sort of be like a rally.
And
Just
was it to have-
air pollution protests, mostly air pollution protests, yeah, because that has strong overlap with my research interests.
So it was a procession of protest.
Yeah, and then of course the Pride Parade, which is sort of like a protest party parade all in one.
Yeah. You were at one last night.
Yeah, I went to the rally in front of the Taipei City Hall to observe, and it's that the atmosphere was really lively, and you could see people cheering loudly and waving the flags in their hands, I think President Tsai and Premier Lai also showed up towards the end to stump for the Taipei mayoral candidate Yao Wen-zhi.
Yeah, well, it seems like he's trailing a bit behind. So.
Yeah, because it's a three-way race, and well,
let's see. He's trailing behind, which means Ko Wen-je and Ding So-jung are still
very
battling
close
it out. Yeah. In Taichung, Lin Jialong has fallen behind.
I'm actually quite
think this
surprised about it.
That he's fallen behind, or that he was ahead earlier?
Yeah, he was winning ahead.
You were surprised that he was ahead earlier?
Yeah. No, I was surprised that he's now behind.
I think he was behind in the polls, though.
Yeah.
And at least a couple of polls I saw from 2 weeks ago, maybe. But polls, as we have learned, don't always indicate predict. Yeah. I don't know. This is gonna be an interesting night. Yeah.
And I'm sure.
Do we know when we all have the results by?
Don't know. But
I thought you guys knew.
no, usually by 7:30. But maybe this year will be different because we see such close race, so it won't be decided until when you count to a kind of a critical number of votes, like reach a certain threshold to guarantee your victory.
Right.
So we probably have to wait a little bit longer.
Well, and back to to some of the things we see at rallies. We've been to this time around. I've been to a couple, and I've seen a lot of broadcasts as well. And it's a lot of all of the candidates for the regional offices will talk a bit about their policies. Other than that, really, the referendum, I haven't seen any talks of the referendums at any of the rallies. And later on, I think we'll ask Lev later on what he's seen for same-sex marriage referendums, also for the name change for our national delegation to the Olympics. But on the energy side, where is this conversation taking place?
I know that for the nuclear referendum, that was launched mostly by this group called Nuclear Mythbusters at Tsinghua University, and they're the only university in Taiwan that has a nuclear engineering department. So that kind of explains why they're interested in the future of nuclear in Taiwan. And then for the 1% reduction in coal thermal, that comes from, I believe, a legislator in Taichung. And Taichung has had a series of protests this year against air pollution because Taichung's air quality continues to decline. So that's sort of where I think those referendums are coming from. But to be honest, I didn't really follow those movements. I sort of just am looking at like the larger political structures in Taiwan on energy.
But it's talked about at work much, I assume?
Not as much as you would think, actually, because for entities like the Industrial Development Bureau, the Ministry of Economics, even the EPA, these are long-term plans they're making for energy, and the only one that's really maybe going to change anything is the one on nuclear. And so, even with that one, Taipower has no appetite to create more nuclear projects. So it's unlikely things are going to change. There would need to be a new government that comes in and creates a long-term strategy to redevelop nuclear using perhaps different technology. But there's nothing really on the horizon for that. Taipower just doesn't want to build big energy facilities anymore. So.
And do we know the legal obligations after the referendum on the energy questions?
The only one would be for nuclear, and that would be to eliminate the ban on nuclear, but that doesn't mean that the government has to use nuclear. And so what a lot of the campaigners were saying is
it does it doesn't mean that they have to use it.
It doesn't mean that they have to use it. It's just that it's not banned.
Okay.
So they have the choice. So we should be specific. Taipower has the choice, and the government has the authority to authorize Taipower to use an increasing amount of nuclear. Some activists, there's some foreign spectators who have been talking about Taiwan's nuclear issues because they're pro-nuclear, and so Taiwan comes up as this is like a potential battle in the global nuclear energy debate, because there's essentially two camps. There's people who think that nuclear is going to help us prevent climate change. It's a source of low carbon, stable energy. It's a complement to renewables, and it works with them. The other camp is that nuclear is not a renewable energy, and that nuclear has serious environmental risks, and it is expensive, and it is risky, so we should not do it. And in Taiwan, you can see that divide as well. And we'll see very clearly what that divide is like by looking at the referendums. Because if people show strong support for eliminating coal plants and show strong support for nuclear, then you can get a sense that maybe the general average of the Taiwanese population wants lower carbon emissions, wants lower air pollution, but doesn't really care how it gets there. However, if they keep the ban on nuclear, if they also ban coal, then we'll just be able to know. We'll have kind of a lens into what the average Taiwanese person thinks about energy, which is important.
But is the development of alternative methods and renewables in Taiwan fast enough to as a replacement?
It can be. Taiwan creates a significant amount of the world's solar modules and cells. Taiwan was actually punished by the U.S. tariffs on solar panels because Taiwan was producing too many solar panels and because there was government support for those. Taiwan produces a significant amount of the world's energy efficiency equipment. There's very large energy efficiency companies like Delta or Billion in Taiwan that can make this equipment. They just don't actually use it in Taiwan. And then if you look at Taiwan and how quickly Taiwan can change, even large-scale infrastructure, think about waste. We've talked about this before, how quickly waste management developed. That's even harder to do than something like setting up wind turbines, which is purely an infrastructure challenge. So I think that the current goal of 20% for renewable energy is far too modest. Taiwan should aim for ideally 100%, but even higher, like 30 or 40, because the more you invest in renewable energy, the lower those costs get, the more reliable your grid can become because you're doing those complementary investments, and the more economies you're going to create within Taiwan. Right now, Taiwan imports 97% of its fuel, so it's lost money. If Taiwan used renewable energy, that value would be retained within the island, and it would develop even more supply chains for Taiwan to participate in globally.
How long would an overhaul have to take to get to 30%?
That's hard to say. If you look at the U.S. Government underestimated the growth of solar. Granted, the U.S. is much flatter than Taiwan and there's much more space, but they underestimated the growth of solar by 300%. So traditionally, government is very bad at estimating the growth of renewables. I've been told that people at certain energy finance and advisory companies tend to just use almost a random number to predict the growth of renewables because it is in some cases a nonlinear growth. Because once you set in those policy ingredients, solar, wind can just grow so fast. But as long as there's barriers, it's never really going to grow. If you look at China, hard to verify those numbers, but the growth of renewables in China has been extraordinary. Taiwan could have more renewables. It's just more of a political willpower question rather than like a technical challenge.
And those are from the state level. What about from the consumers? What kind of changes we'd have to make, or is there any?
It depends on what level of consumer you mean. If you mean like we as global consumers participating in trade.
For Taiwan.
Well, given that 50% of electricity use is industrial, given that 70% of Taiwan's GDP is based on exports, the average Taiwanese person is not that much that they can do. If you think about the average Taiwanese person, they probably don't eat very much meat. They probably don't travel abroad very often. They probably don't use a lot of power at home. They probably spend most of the time in their office. They could install energy efficiency equipment at home. They could put solar panels on their roof if their apartment building allows them to do that. And they can continue to support companies who are making renewable energy choices. That would be the best way to do that. Or to vote for politicians who support renewable energy. But unfortunately, because so much of Taiwan's environmental impact is industrial, the average person doesn't really have a choice, yet they suffer the consequences of those industrial decisions.
So are most of the lobbyists for renewables for Taiwan lobbying, targeting towards the industrial? Then is that
Taiwan does not have like the same kind of lobbyist network that the U.S. does. If you look at NGOs, they're all advocating for higher levels of renewables for the most part. If you look at academic institutions, similarly, the think tanks, like speaking only about SEER, that works for government grants. So that kind of depends on the grants and the requests that the government has to enact those policies. But generally, if you look at the data and you look at the objective scientific information, Taiwan transitioning to renewables is going to be better environmentally, economically. It's going to be better for human health. It's just the viable long-term solution for the island. Coal, natural gas is a temporary best fix, and nuclear, as it's currently done, is risky. Taiwan has issues with coal plants shutting down. If you have that same problem with nuclear, that's kind of a different level crisis. That's not to say that nuclear at some point couldn't work in Taiwan, but there's no way as it's currently planned it could work today. That's my rant about energy in Taiwan.
It's a lot to digest, I have to say. I mean, it's something that I think it's so complicated that the average person like myself, it's not, it deals with so much. And I can see how for the referendum, for that to be on referendum questions, it's slightly confusing, right? There's so much to think about.
I meet Taiwanese people who think that their energy usage is 70% nuclear. I meet other people who think that Taiwan is already using mostly renewables. It seems like people just take visual cues and they kind of extrapolate that into what the energy world is like. People who work on energy are mostly scientists. Scientists aren't the best at communicating, so it's really difficult to bridge that divide. Taiwan in general kind of struggles with marketing and communications at times. Even if you go online, you can find information like how much does it cost to produce a kilowatt hour from coal versus renewables. That information, it's very questionable. We're not sure the methods that are being used to determine that. So it's hard for the average consumer to learn this. It took me a very long time to be able to even have this knowledge. And a lot of things you just learn from people in the industry. It's not written down a lot of times because it maybe doesn't sound very good when you actually think about what it really is.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's have an election update here. To the mayoral races, Taichung, the current mayor Lin Jialong is trailing very much behind.
Kaohsiung's still super close.
Kaohsiung is super close. This is really surprising. Everything we've seen the past month, especially, the past week. The past month, with the momentum going up to the past week, tells us that Han Kuo-yu is going to take Kaohsiung. And obviously the other very exciting race is Taipei, where Ding Shouzhong and Ko Winter are also tied neck to neck every time I turn my head. It is just, nobody's pulling ahead. What else we have here on the counties?
A lot of people with no political affiliation.
A lot. You're right.
I didn't pay attention before, but this seems like this is a new trend in Taiwan.
Well, I know at least on the Lijiang level, 80% of the candidates are running as independents, and that's apparently a 20% increase from the last election. But then, as I mentioned that to somebody else earlier, their follow-up was how many of those people were previous party affiliates? How much how many of them are masking their actual party affiliations? Don't know. But well, I think at least for last election, when Ko-Windsor won as an independent, that was very, very, very surprising. And so I don't know if this is a thing. That's the question here is there's a lot of independence now, and whether this is a trend that we'll see more of.
I would say so. And well, for the council members, we do have people running from new NPP, but they're not kind of shown on the screen here. So I think it's non-party affiliated or non-affiliated with the two major parties, like KMT or DPP.
We'll talk a lot about the NPP in just a little bit. Don't worry. Cool. Well, Nate, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk about the environment, trash, garbage.
Yeah, and where on social media can people find you should they want to learn more about the environment or talk to you about the environment?
You can find me on, well, I don't really use Twitter, but you can find me there under Nate May, N8, M-A-Y, or you can find me on Facebook. I have a secret Facebook group called Nature Nate's Forum. That's Nate spelled with an N8. And you can also find me writing for the News Lens. I write articles basically every month if I'm not running behind. And I just published one about 100% renewable energy in Taiwan. So very topical.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Have a good rest
Thanks for
of the
having me.
evening.
Yeah. And enjoy reporting on this.
Thank you. We have 2 more hours to go.
2 more hours. We're halfway done. If you're just turning in the past hour or so, I'm Emily.
This is Chun-Yi.
And we're still in Taipei at Radio Taiwan International for the special elections coverage tonight. We've been at you since 5 o'clock. Tonight, before we wrap by 9, this is a 4-hour special, we should hopefully know some of the results of the major races, the mayoral races especially.
I must say that this year it's quite unusual because usually by this time of the day, some of the results would have been kind of decided and we would know. But it seems to me that a lot of the races are still neck to neck and we're still counting the ballots and it looks like it's going to drag on for quite a while.
I hope this means that there are a lot of ballots to count.
I noticed that the turnout rate seems to be higher this time compared to the previous ones. So I would think that the ballots would be more than in the past. And especially we have 10 topics on the referendum. So just counting those referendum
Right. Well, we're not
ones,
counting them yet, right? So
I thought we're counting them as parallel.
I think they count them after.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's why we have to wait for a while.
Okay.
For the referendum. But yeah, I'm really excited to see the numbers for the voter turnout. I'm hoping this means a lot more of us came out to vote today. And now we have our final guest for the second half of our segment, Lev Nachman. Nachman, thank you. Lev is a PhD student in political science at the University of California at Irvine, studying social movements and party politics. So we're really lucky to have you here today.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here. Exciting and stressful, but mostly exciting.
Well, you live in California, and you just happen to be here this week.
I do. I came back just for the election. Because I study party politics in Taiwan, it really was kind of an occupational obligation to be here. But also, I just am so incredibly invested in what's happening that it was an opportunity too good to pass up to not come back for the week. I've been here for about a week to watch kind of the build-up. I tried to attend as many of the rallies and some of the protests, and just to talk to people and see kind of how everyone is feeling about who they're voting for and why they're voting for their candidates. And now to see the results in real time is just it's very exciting.
Yeah. Before I asked you questions, about your work and for Taiwan. There's just one thing I want to ask you. So you're also an assistant editor at the China channel of the LA Review of Books. You're host of a podcast that looks at China through the eyes of journalists, writers, and specialists. However, so I just named, there's a lot of China in those things I just said. However, back in January, you wrote an op-ed for the New Bloom magazine.
Correct.
Talking about the struggles of declaring a Taiwan-focused studies as your primary research. In the article, you said that those around you, even your advisor at the time, has said it would be a career suicide if you didn't change your focus to be more China-centric. But you stood your ground, and here you are.
It's true.
It sounded really lonely. Like, is it lonely?
Yes and no. I should start with that. You know, the people at China Channel are incredibly warm and welcoming to any interpretation of what it means, of what China may or may not mean. And there's absolutely no. They report on tons of Taiwan social movement coverage. They've actually been posting a lot of really great pieces about Xinjiang in the last few weeks as well. So they're not shy about sensitive topics. To be Taiwan studies, so the good news is that people in Taiwan studies, there's not a lot of us. And I think we're all very self-aware of the fact that there's not a lot of us. And because of that, we really take an effort to be on good standing with each other and to, foster good relations with each other. Because we genuinely care about Taiwan. And I think there's just not a lot of room for ego within kind of our little circle of academia, especially since we go up against so many challenges. The big one being, like I talked about in my op-ed, is how do we position Taiwan studies within academia? Are we our own separate thing? Are we a part of this China studies umbrella? What are kind of the advantages and disadvantages to these things? And there's no right or wrong answer. My frustration with the op-ed that you kind of talked about was it's seen as a very, very risky, if not bad idea to declare yourself to be studying Taiwan and to say that I want to be a Taiwan expert, especially within kind of China studies circles, because a lot of China studies professors tend to want to steer their students more towards China-centered topics. They're seen as more relevant, going to be more impactful, more likely to get you grants and research money and jobs in the future. And, to some degree, they're not wrong. I love Taiwan. People in Taiwan studies love Taiwan, but we also recognize that we're like a niche within a niche within a niche. And it's just something that we have to be aware of, and something that, we work really hard to make sure that we can still kind of overcome kind of the structural challenges that we face within academia.
Mm-hmm. So how has it felt being back this week during such a lovely time?
It's so good to be back. The second I walk out of Taoyuan Airport, I just want to give the ground a hug, and I'm so incredibly happy to be back here.
Is this the first time you observe a Taiwan election?
Second time. Okay. I was back.
When was your last time?
The last election was my first.
Okay.
And I have a very distinct memory of the 2016 election because I was heavily invested in Lin Changzuo, Freddie Lim, his election. So he's one of the Li Fa Yuan legislatures, thank you, of the New Power Party, which is one of the new political parties formed out of the 2014 social movement, the Sunflower Movement. And Freddie was up against a very tough race, against a very long time KMT-held district, and he won. And it was incredibly exciting. And his acceptance speech was him, coming out and saying, I, Freddie Lim, with long hair and tattoos, am now a legislature in the executive yuan, and it was like a very exciting moment.
Yeah, and Freddie is also a well-known singer.
Yes, Freddie. The reason Freddie was such a big deal, and also you're going to see me fanboy for a second, he's the lead singer of Taiwan's most famous metal band called Thonic, or Shanling in Mandarin. And they're known as, I think, like the Korn or Metallica of East Asia. And he was famous as a rock star before he was a politician. He was also very famous as an activist before he became a politician. He was the head of Taiwan's Amnesty International board for a long time. He's personal friends with the Dalai Lama. and has been attending every single protest since I think he was able to. So,
See the spirit of the party.
So
Would you say that
of the new power
coming
party,
coming out of the Sunflower Movement, he's been the spirit
so
of the party?
yes and no. So Freddie himself was not actually a leader of the Sunflower Movement. He actually didn't get to the Sunflower Movement till way after the movement had started. And even when he officially joined the movement, he didn't seek any leadership role. He didn't really have a large presence. He really was there as a participant more than a kind of meant to be a well-known figure. And he didn't actually join the NPP project. So the formation of the NPP is a very long story that I'm happy to talk more about later. But in terms of Freddie didn't. So the party officially formed in January of 2015. But they had been organizing this party for over a year before then. Freddie didn't actually join the project until December of 2014, just like a month before they had formally registered. So he himself wasn't kind of the original person who founded and thought of the idea of the New Power Party, but he very much, because of who he is, because he's so well known, has become the face of the New Power Party more internationally and domestically to some degree. So, anytime the New Power Party does any sort of international fundraising trips or needs to make a speech internationally, you can guarantee that Freddie is going to be there. I mean, he sticks out of a crowd. He's got long hair and tattoos, and he makes laws in Taiwan, so that makes him a very appealing figure.
You lost me at that image.
I've
never been to his concert. I have not seen him live, and yeah.
So in 2016, instead of doing a formal political rally like most politicians do, where they get a bunch of speakers and they play some dramatic, cheery music, Freddie just put on a rock concert, and he had his band play, and the entire thing is on YouTube if you want to go back and watch it. And it's really funny because there's this fantastic semi-awkward but semi-sweet moment where Kobanja comes out to endorse Freddie while Freddie is kind of in his metal gear.
So for any of our viewers who may be new arrivals to Taiwan perhaps, or maybe tuning in, not knowing much about Taiwan, tuning in from abroad, trying to understand more, it gives a quick background of what the Sunflower Movement was and how that, how the development of that has led us to today.
Great. So in 2014, the largest social movement in Taiwan's history, called the Sunflower Movement, happened in between March and April of 2014. The underlying catalyst for the movement was this bill called the Cross-Strait Service Trade Agreement, CSSTA. And what that bill would have done would take a large amount of Taiwan's economy and kind of give China exclusive rights to that part of Taiwan's market. So, for example, the service sector of Taiwan, which makes up a very, very large number of Taiwan's economy, I think 70-some%, would have been given mostly exclusive rights to China. The specifics of the bill are I'm not remembering very clearly, but it was really a dangerous deal for Taiwan. So that sparked the other very controversial part of the bill was that it was passed semi-legally, and that instead of going under proper review within the executive yuan, they passed it in this moment. I think they said it passed within like 10 to 30 seconds or something. So on one hand, it was passed not very legally, without any sort of formal revision or chance to have a discussion about what the bill was. And then the bill itself was just a really bad deal for Taiwan. It was an economics bill, but the Sunflower Movement wasn't really an economic protest. It really was a larger statement about Taiwan, young people in Taiwan especially, their relationship with the KMT, and their sentiment of Taiwan becoming more and more, in a kind of coercive way, attached to China. So after the bill was passed, there was a call for mobilization around the executive yuan, and it turned into this very, very large Occupy-style movement that lasted for 3 to 4 weeks. During the time, a group of protesters actually entered and occupied the executive yuan. There was at one point, the legislative yuan, excuse me. At one point, there was a charge to occupy the executive yuan as well. but that ultimately failed, and they were removed physically. And the protest ended with the bill being redacted, and it actually never passed. It kind of just like disappeared. And one of the most important takeaways of the Sunflower Movement was it signaled massive discontent with the KMT. So the most important issue, or the most salient political kind of voting cleavage in 2016, was the KMT. Do you support the KMT? Do you not support the KMT? People voted almost exclusively along the lines of whether or not a politician was from the KMT or not. So when we look at the 2016 election, it was a massive victory for the DPP. Taiwan was fully green. The KMT lost spectacularly, and in a way that they've really struggled to recover since then. And looking at the election results tonight,
2 years later,
there's
almost.
very much going to be an argument that the KMT's victory tonight shows a return for support of the KMT. I don't think that's the case. I think the narrative that's happening in Taiwan is not a return of support for the KMT, but rather a signal of dissatisfaction with the DPP. And that matters. So why people vote for certain parties is extremely important, and it's important to take a nuanced perspective of how people vote, because just voting for a party does not signal support for that party. And I think we're going to see that both with how many people are voting for the KMT, especially in Kaohsiung. I think Kaohsiung is a wonderful case to talk about the idea of protest voting, which is, in political science, protest voting is voting for not the party you support, but for another party as a means to signal dissatisfaction or discontent with the party you actually support.
But how does the MPP fit into that, right?
Great
Because
question. So in 2016, why would so a really great question is why would people vote for the NPP and not the DPP? And that might seem obvious, but you kind of have to untangle that question and look specifically at what does the DPP offer and what does the NPP offer. And to some degree there is a lot of overlap, but the NPP is an outspoken pro-independence party. The DPP has been very pro-status quo for quite some time. The DPP is not a pro-independence party. They lean more towards, pro-Taiwan autonomy, but they by no means have pursued any sort of pro-independence platform in a very long time. At the same time, there are plenty of people who see the DPP as a dysfunctional and an untrustworthy party. And in Taiwanese politics, if you're not happy with the DPP, who can you vote for? Obviously, there were some other smaller parties like the Green Party or the Taiwan Solidarity Union. But really, the NPP gives kind of green politics and leftist politics, leftist in Taiwan meaning pro-independence, supporters another party to vote for and another party to support. A lot of the voting for the NPP in 2016 was done out of protest to signal dissatisfaction and discontent with the DPP. I think it's important. Obviously, the DPP's reputation has gone very downhill the last 2 years. Tsai Ing-wen's approval rating is not great. And I think it's important to remember, though, that dissatisfaction with the DPP is not new. They did not happen just within the last 2 years with Tsai Ing-wen. Dissatisfaction of the DPP has been a long-term trend, especially within social activist movements. Young people are not necessarily guaranteed to support the DPP. They have especially been looking for other parties to support. And I think and then to tie this back to Sunflower, the most important, in my opinion, political outcome of Sunflower was the formation of these new, what are called third force parties, like the NPP, that give people an alternative to the DPP on the left.
There are 39 candidates, 40 MPP candidates today.
Yes.
Where are they running mostly?
They are all over the island. It's honestly amazing because the NPP is a very, very new party. They've formally formed in 2015, and to have go from nothing to having 40 local candidates is very ambitious. It could totally backfire today. I think that there's going to be a very tough discussion about how many NPP candidates winning will it take for the NPP to call this night successful? If they get 10 out of 40, is that successful? If they get 5 out of 40, is that successful? They're obviously not going to get 40 out of 40. It's going to be hard. I thought I had predictions, and then, like most other Taiwan political science analysts, everything I thought I knew has kind of gone out the door. So I honestly could not tell you how well the NPP is going to do tonight. I know I have a handful of predictions about who I think will get elected, just purely based off of kind of participatory observation that I've been doing the last few months. But it's going to be really tough to kind of determine what's going to make this a good night for the NPP. And the reason it matters is because how well the NPP does in this election is going to signal how well they will do in 2020. So in 2016, the NPP was able to get, I'm going to mess this up, at least it was 2 district elected officials, and then 3 party list members, for a total of 5 members in the Legislative Yuan. Taiwan's system is complicated. But if they were able to get 5 members in 2016, I think a very reasonable standard of success in 2020 would be to get 5 members again, like repeat what they could do the last time. And their ability to have that same kind of success in 2020, I think tonight is going to be kind of our very first look at, okay, there's this new party. They had success in 2016, their very first presidential election. How do they do in the midterm? And what does that say about how they'll do in the next presidential election? And I'm looking right now and I can see one of the NPP candidates is doing fairly well, and that makes me very happy. Oof.
So we've talked a lot about the NPP. Do you mind elaborating about why you think the DPP is not attracting some young people's support anymore, although it seems like back in 2016, I mean, it is like landsliding, proportion of the youth supporting Tsai's campaign.
Fantastic.
And it's only just after less than 3 years that the tide has changed.
So my most recent academic article actually asks this question, looking at why opposition activists would not support the opposition party. And I give three reasons that are kind of tied into what we talked a little bit about tonight. So how do young activists see the DPP? So there's the kind of the political cleavage explanation of, in Taiwan, the most important issue that we always are talking about, independence unification. So if I'm pro-independence and I look at Tsai Ing-wen, do I support her? Is Tsai Ing-wen pro-independence? Not really. She's pretty pro-status quo. Now, obviously, she gives a couple of good nudges towards a more pro-Taiwan autonomy, like she did with the Golden Horse Awards, where she said, Taiwan has never accepted that it is Taiwan, China. Yes, but that's still not really saying I support Taiwanese independence. That's very different things. And even the DPP largely as a party is very pro-status quo moderate when it comes to talking about independence as an official party stance. So if I'm a young sunflower activist, I'm pro-independence, and I look at the DPP and I say, does that party really represent me? If we look at it kind of on a spectrum, and we say, independence, I want independence tomorrow is on one side, and I want unification is on the other side, where is the DPP? I'd put it kind of somewhere moderate left. And I would put the NPP and kind of the sunflower activist cohort farther left than the DPP.
And where would you place the so-called deep green?
Deep green? Same with the NPP. Point being is that there's kind of there's a gap in kind of where their stances fall on the political spectrum. That's the first explanation for why would they not support the DPP. The second explanation would be that they see the party kind of as inherently a corrupt political party in the same way they see the KMT as a corrupt political party. So, whether or not these things are true or not, the perception that a lot of activists have of the DPP is that, they have become a fully bureaucratized political party that is full of corruption, inefficiency, that is more concerned with the party's well-being than Taiwan's well-being. That's a good enough reason for a lot of them to no longer support the DPP, even if they ideologically align. Why do I want to support a party that doesn't actually do what we both want?
But do you think is the reason for their switch of their support is only for this national identity issue, or this pro-independence or pro-status quo, pro-unification, or there's a lot more to it? Like, my question lies in the is national identity or pro-independence, pro-unification this overarching kind of political issue in Taiwan that it kind of overshadows the other really kind of other also important issues that probably affect our day-to-day life more, such as what's on the referendum tickets, like the energy issue, or same-sex marriage for quite a large, not large, but quite some percentage of population here in Taiwan.
So, yes, obviously there are other issues that matter in Taiwan besides independence unification. But a lot of the times, that's not how people vote in Taiwan. So that explanation one is that's not how people vote in Taiwan. Explanation number two is that those other issues kind of map themselves nicely onto this unification independence spectrum. So for example, nuclear power. Nuclear power tends to be a pro-unification green-sided issue. Like the anti-nuclear power movement was kind of started by DPP politicians,
Lin
Yishiong,
Yeah.
exactly. And those who are for nuclear power tend to be pro-KMT. A lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of the assets that are invested in nuclear power
are owned by KMT affiliated companies.
So even though when you just look at, do I support nuclear power, yes or no, that has nothing to do with Taiwanese identity. At the same time, it has a lot to do with Taiwanese identity.
Yeah, it's very true.
So at the same time, we could also look, there's a bunch of very interesting research that's been done on what issues Taiwanese people care about. Specifically, there's a new book called The Taiwan Voter. And it looks at whether or not
Who's the author of
it's a collection
Taiwan?
of academics
So
based in Taiwan mostly.
If we want to look for that book, where can we find it?
At your local university library.
Okay, so it's at the in the library. Is it kind of on the market? We could.
Yeah, so it should be
online,
any library should have it. It's also available online, I know, on JSTOR. But there's one of the chapters in the book looks at the concept of wealth distribution. So there are rich people in Taiwan and there are poor people in Taiwan. And kind of globally, the idea is that taxes and wealth redistribution, people vote on that. Like that matters. The research shows that it actually doesn't really matter very much in Taiwan.
And why do you think that is the case?
That's a great question. I think someone should go do some qualitative research that can kind of fill in that gap of knowledge. I think it's largely because the independence unification issue just is
overshadowing other issues.
And that, again, that's not to say people aren't bothered by wealth inequality. I think they are. It's just when it comes to what do people vote for, that's not how people are making their political decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Am I explaining that okay?
Yeah, because our target audience is international audience and also expats living in Taiwan. So I think your explanation actually helped them understand Taiwan politics more.
Yes.
And by understanding this more, they would get to know Taiwan better and know what people really care about and why. I think the results of the election and then the results which would come much later on the referendum is just kind of a tip of an iceberg. There's so much behind the results.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why we have you here today to kind of expound on these for our audience.
And I hope people, when they see the results, the numbers can't explain everything. So again, to rehash, I really hope an important takeaway that people get out of this election is not that there's suddenly a resurgence of KMT support across Taiwan, but rather just massive disappointment and disillusion with the DPP. I think if you only looked at the numbers, so worst case scenario, I shouldn't say worst case scenario, I'm objective. In the event that the KMT wins everything, a lot of or the majority of kind of the 6 big municipalities, I think a lot of people could easily just say, well, look at the numbers. Everyone voted for the KMT. Therefore, the KMT is supported in Taiwan. I think that's too quick of a judgment. I think you really have to do the deep dive into each of these cities' elections. Why were people voting for the KMT? Especially, or why did the KMT win? Especially in Taipei, we have 3 candidates in Taipei: Ko Wen-je, Ya Wen-je, and Ding Shou-zhong. And Ding Shou-zhong and Ko Wen-je are really close right now. And just looking at how many votes Ya Wen-je has, Ya Wen-je is not going to win. Everyone kind of knew he was not going to win. And I think a great kind of counterfactual question, or a what if question, is if Ya Wen-je, the DPP candidate, did not run, where would his votes have gone? I think his votes would have largely gone to Ko Wen-je.
Yeah.
If Ko Wen-je loses, I don't think this is because people support Ding Shou-zhong as their top choice. I think it's because there is a split within kind of green politics in Taipei. I think it is largely because Ko Wen-je has shot himself in the foot, specifically with his one Liang An Yi Jia Qin, which is like 2 sides.
In English?
So a couple months ago, was what, 2-3 months ago? It was longer than that.
I think longer than that.
It only became scandalous a few months ago. Ko Wen-je made this comment, Liang An Yi Jia Qin, which roughly translates to, two sides of the strait, one family. The reason that's controversial is to say one family means that Taiwanese and Chinese are actually the same, or the same family. Now, that in of itself might not seem very political, but if you are pro-Taiwan independence and you see yourself, a Taiwanese person, as distinctively different from someone who is Chinese, that is a very harmful thing to say. That matters especially because the majority of sunflower activists who are pro-Taiwan independence, who do see themselves as exclusively Taiwanese, not Chinese, voted for Ko Wen-je. So when he says something like Liang An Yi Jia Qin, that's betrayal. That's a really, really hurtful thing to say to someone who voted for him because they thought he was going to be pro-independence, or at least something more neutral. Now, whether or not they should have even thought Ko Wen-je was pro-independence in the first place is a different discussion. But the fact that he said, 2 sides of the strait, one family, his support from the pro-independence left dropped entirely. I believe that the votes that Ya Wen-je is getting in this election a lot of them are people who would have voted for Ko Wen-je had he not made the Liang An Yi Jia Qin statement. I know it may seem silly that one line like that could have such a massive impact, but I really believe that has completely isolated a lot of the pro-independence left support that would have voted for Ko Wen-je otherwise. The votes that Ya Wen-je is getting are not in support of him. The majority of people that I talk to, which are mostly activists, do not consider Ya Wen-je to be a serious politician. They think he's a bit of a joke. A lot of people have kind of understood that the DPP ran him to lose, meaning that they knew he was going to lose. They only are voting for, if you had asked them before this Liang An Yi Jia Qin scandal who they were going to vote for, they would have said they were going to vote for Ko Wen-je. After the scandal, they now are supporting, or they are not supporting. They are voting for Ya Wen-je. And this is kind of a prime example of a protest vote. So again, they're voting for someone not because they support them, but in order to give a signal of dissatisfaction to the person they actually support. So they feel a little bit heartbroken and betrayed by Ko Wen-je. What's the best way to get back at Ko Wen-je than to vote for someone else?
Yeah, but again, this election is local election. So when we speak of local elections, conventionally we would think of, okay, we look at how a mayor should serve the citizens of the city, and we would normally or naturally focus on how he would improve the road system or how he would enhance the livelihood and well-being of the city residents, instead of how that candidate's attitude is regarding pro-independence or pro-unification, or the candidate's attitude towards China. And why is this so strong and so special in Taiwan? Because this is a local election, and I think most international people or a lot of the foreigners would not understand why this would be the deciding factor, if I may use the word deciding factor for the election results for certain candidates.
Absolutely. I think the first thing it's a really, really good question. I think the first important note is that after Taiwan, after the president of Taiwan, the next most important public political figure is the mayor of Taipei. And the reason that is because the mayor of Taipei, one, has a very large presence internationally, and two, because Taipei is the most important city in Taiwan, but also what has Ko Wen-je done kind of during his time is that he's kind of set up this sister city partnership with Shanghai. And that kind of brought the issue of, I think that kind of brought the issue of identity much more closely to local elections than it maybe would have otherwise had he not pursued so strongly this deal with Shanghai. Now, I think the other issue is that I believe identity politics in Taiwan always matter. Even at local elections. Even when you think it doesn't matter, whether or not someone identifies as Taiwanese, Chinese, whether they identify with the KMT or the DPP, it's always going to matter. And again, research shows that that is what Taiwanese people vote on.
Yes. So, Emily, welcome back.
Thank you. Apologies.
Well, it's a really long race, so we took turns having our dinner.
Have you eaten yet?
No, but I'm fine.
Okay,
I promise.
Well, so speaking of identity politics, one of your focus areas is also in Hong Kong.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to ask you about some of the parallels between Taiwan and Hong Kong, not in terms of Hong Kong today, Taiwan tomorrow, not that, but just on social movements, right? So Sunflowers and Umbrella movement of Hong Kong kind of roughly happened around the same time. And we know there had been a lot of exchanges between the two groups, exchanges of ideas and methodologies. Even though the two exist under different political climates and in different political systems, kind of what, in terms of how they developed into parties, how the social movements gained the momentum to be mobilized into political parties, what are the differences that you've observed on two sides? Also for the prospect of the future for the student leaders and their parties for Taiwan and Hong Kong.
That's a fantastic question. So the reason that's a really exciting question for me is because my dissertation is looking specifically at the question of why do some social movements institutionalize into political parties and why others don't. And there's a lot to say about comparing Taiwan and Hong Kong together. And I think you kind of have to start locally with each movement. And not to spend too much time talking about Umbrella, because Umbrella is a very complicated. The Umbrella movement was the movement that happened in Hong Kong around the same time as the Sunflower movement. And the important takeaway in terms of just comparing the movements is Sunflower is largely regarded as a very successful social movement. They had clear goals. Once they achieved those goals, they exited kind of their mobilization area and stepped down and accepted, the movement leaders accepted kind of their consequences. They were, found not guilty of anything, and they celebrated their victory. The umbrella movement is a very different story. Umbrella is largely considered to be a failure of a movement. There was no singular clear leadership. There was no clear set goals. The movement was very disjointed. There were a lot more violent crackdowns during Umbrella than there were of Sunflower, and ultimately nothing really got accomplished out of Umbrella. If anything, the situation in Hong Kong has only deteriorated to an extreme that we thought would not ever happen today, as it was back in 2014 when Umbrella happened. And yet you have these two very different social movements, one very successful, one very not successful, and you still have a huge explosion of new political parties that formed out of both of these movements. So in Taiwan, we have the New Power Party, we have the Social Democratic Party, we have the Radical Party, we have the Trees Party, we have the Free Taiwan Party. I'll stop. There's more, but and then in Hong Kong, you have Demosisto, Youngspiration, Civic Passion. Again, there's lots and lots of new parties that formed, and the process in which these parties formed is very different in each place, and you kind of have to trace back carefully where these parties officially start, whether they start before the movement, during the movement, after the movement, what was kind of their connection to other parties. Because a big part of my research question is why so many movements? Why not just one big Sunflower Party and one big Umbrella Party? Why did we get so many different ones? And it's very different explanations in each place. So in Taiwan, there's a lot more kind of the reasons largely have to do with kind of interpersonal relationships amongst movement actors, and whether or not they kind of saw themselves as one cohesive unit that was able to kind of form their own party, or whether or not they'd be better off forming different parties. And the case of Hong Kong largely has to do with kind of misinformation amongst party leaders or lack thereof. So, for example, in Hong Kong, two parties that I'm particularly interested in, Demosisto, founded by the famous activist Joshua Wong, and Youngspiration, founded by the also famous activist Bajio Lung. They formed at separate times, and the reason that they formed, one of the main reasons that I think they formed separately was because they just actually didn't know that they were forming their own political parties. I think that if more of these kind of party founders in Hong Kong knew that other people were also forming their own parties, we would have seen much fewer parties form and much more cooperation. But just kind of lack of exchange of information played a large role in kind of party formation in Hong Kong.
How is that energy or synergy? This is to you, Tony. How is the energy or synergy different or similar, like comparing to in the late 80s? Do you remember what the energy was like? I mean, speaking of social
In the
movements.
late 80s, I was not
Early
so
90s, early 90s.
I was still not old enough to vote, and
Yeah.
also didn't attend those rallies. In the 90s, that's just a few years after the martial law was lifted, and I think people are just kind of embracing democracy in a kind of a fervent way, but still don't know where the limits are. And then sometimes the authorities are also kind of jostling with the people. So I think back then, or even dating back earlier at the Dangwai time, when the Dangwai is kind of an underground or illegal party, or outside the party, literally translated as outside the party. You know,
During
you
martial law.
yeah, people may risk their life, or they may be, kind of punished for attending those rallies. So there's a kind of a hush hush atmosphere, but there's also kind of this daring kind of element in those rallies. And I've read stories about how the electricity would be shut down all of a sudden, and then sometimes the candidates or the people stumping for them would use that kind of electricity shut down as an opportunity to kind of hit back at the authorities, saying like, okay, they're trying to kind of attack us, doing this and that. So back then, it's without, you could see that with those rallies, 党外 rallies, there weren't enough resources, so there's a lot of makeshift to make do, but the supporters would be kind of throwing money at them, and then and these are supporters that are willing to take risk in showing their support. But nowadays is of course different. DPP that kind of descendants from 党外, they have enough resources to run large-scale rallies, and then everything is well organized, planned, and there's even so-called SOPs where the usually when the campaign rally or the starts is like a staged show where you have usually two MCs starting to warm up the scene, and then you invite kind of smaller, less famous shots to warm up. It's like a concert. And then gradually you move to some live music or band performing, but the songs being selected or presented at that rallies would be kind of relevant themes, or in many DPP rallies it would be songs related to like old Taiwan songs, or songs related to the youth movement or to social justice, and it's usually sung in Taiwanese or Hakka, while the KMT rallies would be filled with those patriotic songs that when we were little, we were forced to sing those songs in school. So there's a different of symbolism in these selections of what is being included and presented at those rallies. And then, so I was talking about you start with the smaller shots, and then you have the bigger shots coming to join the rally to stump for the candidates. And sometimes you have organized groups or NGOs or guild or professional associations, professors all forming and getting on the stage to show their support. And then you have cameras zoom in and out, and you have large screens set up there for the participants, and the MCs would kind of shout the slogan, and the participants are so well trained or so versed in the kind of rhythm or tempo that they would work with the MCs and kind of work together, and sometimes even kind of do a little performance of like 动算, like calling out the name of a candidate, and you shout back 动算, meaning get elected. So we see a lot of these very mature rituals or gestures, political gestures or symbolism in these kind of modern or present day rallies. And these are the kind of things that you didn't really see back in those old days. Things seem to be more spontaneous, and partly due to kind of lack of experience, but and also maybe lack of resources back then. But now I think for the last 2 decades or more, I think DPP kind of took the lead in terms of setting the formats for these campaign rallies, and they're kind of good at it because they developed these tactics or techniques throughout the years, starting from the 党外 period. But now with the introduction of social media, smartphones, etc., it seems like these types of traditional or conventional campaign strategies or stumps don't really work as effectively as in the past. So maybe, Lev, you can talk a little bit about your research on this and the symbolism and the changes of symbols in these rallies. Yeah.
I think, like I talked a little bit about earlier, when you look at kind of how Freddie ran his campaign in 2016, it was very atypical for what you would see at a political rally. And the DPP, I think you're totally right. I think the DPP is not appealing to kind of the younger generation in a way that actually speaks to them and makes them excited to vote for the DPP. They've tried. I think one of the best examples is there's a famous rock band in Taiwan called Fire Extinguisher, Miehouqi. They wrote the anthem to the Sunflower Movement. The fact that the Sunflower Movement had its own anthem, I think, like speaks to how successful it really was. But ever since they wrote the anthem, the DPP has brought them on to play at their rallies. Tsai Ing-wen did it in 2016, and I'm fairly certain Yao Wen-je had them on. I might be wrong, but the idea that the DPP is trying to use rock bands, not just rock bands, but kind of rock bands with a connection to the Sunflower Movement, shows that they're trying to find ways to appeal to the youth. I don't think they're doing it very successfully. I think that, and we saw this in 2016, the DPP really tried to kind of co-opt sunflower slogans and rhetoric into their campaigns, and, kind of endorsed a lot of sunflower candidates, especially from the MPP. But I don't think they did that particularly well in this election. I think that's, again, largely because they did not run Yao very seriously. Or very well. I mean, I know he's been campaigning for a really long time, much longer than Ding Sozhong or Ko Wen-je.
Who actually is pulling ahead right now.
Ding Sozhong?
Has just pulled ahead a bit.
These results are so...
No, it's now flipped.
I don't know if I seem calm,
Yeah,
but I am all torn up inside about these results.
Just under 3,000 votes difference right now between Ding Sozhong and Ko Wen-je.
Wow. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, I think that again, the reason this kind of matters is because when you look at why did young people in this election then therefore, if the DPP isn't doing a good job of appealing to young people, why did young people vote for Yao Wen-je in this election? And I think that goes back to what I said earlier about they're not voting for him out of support. They're voting for him out of protest. They're doing it to signal to Ko Wen-je that Ko Wen-je has let kind of the youth activist cohort down. And the best way to get back at Ko Wen-je is to vote for Yao Wen-je. Because the young people are never going to vote for a KMT candidate. It's just not going to happen. They will vote for a DPP candidate if they have to. We saw that in 2016 with Tsai Ing-wen. So, right, the other part of the story that I never got to finish was in 2016, if young people are not particularly supportive of the DPP, why would they still vote for Tsai Ing-wen? And that largely has to do with because the only thing that young people were focused on in 2016 was making sure the KMT did not win. That was the number one issue. They would vote for any candidate who was not KMT. And if the presidential election is KMT and someone else, they're going to vote for someone else. And in 2016, that was Tsai Ing-wen. So.
And some coined this new generation or young people or new generation of voters called 天然独, the natural born pro-independence groups. So I think this coinage kind of echoes what you have just described as the national identity issue certainly has an impact on their voting behavior. And we do see a generation gap here. I mean, these are the group of people that are used to using social media, so the traditional or more conventional ways of campaigning would not appeal too much to them. Yeah. And then I think, do you think in that sense, although Ke said that famous or notorious sentence 两岸一家亲, but because his application of social media has been successful enough, that's why he is able to retain certain supporters, especially among the youth.
Ko Wen-je was amazing at using social media, and not just social media, but just kind of new technology to rally people around him. So earlier this summer, there's a YouTube series that follows professionals around for an entire day, and they had an episode on Ko Wen-je where they followed him around for an entire day. And I remembered this summer that it was incredibly successful. because Koenja was funny. He kind of trash talked some DPP politicians during the day, and that people got a good kick out of that. But he knows how to act in front of a camera, and the part of the reason I think young people like Koenja is because he's a total wild card. It's a good point though. Why then do some pro-independence activists still vote for Koenja, even though he has clearly signaled that he's not really pro-independence, which is something we've known for a while? Why would people still support him? And I think it's because they still see Koenja as an outside establishment. So Koenja's nickname in Mandarin is Ke Pi. The P stands for physician because Koenja was a doctor before he was a politician.
No, actually, the P stands for professor.
Oh, professor. Oh, excuse me. I saw
because
this
in National Taiwan University, that's University Hospital, when they call somebody like Ke Pi or the last name with P, that's because that doctor has reached status of professorship, and that's the highest kind of status you could reach within the university hospital system. So that P stands for professor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, good to know.
I did not know that.
But importantly, he had nothing to do with politics until he decided to run for mayor in 2014. So for a lot of young people, he kind of represented the answer a lot of them were looking for in terms of, we want a politician who's not a politician, who's not kind of tied in with these parties, who's not just a family member of a former politician. We want a total fresh face. And I think Koenja, one, is that. Two, like I said, he's a total wild card on camera. The things he says are really entertaining. If not sometimes, kind of off color and a little bit offensive, but I think
especially to women.
Oh, he's very misogynistic. And it's surprising to me that this only became an issue in the last couple of months. That's also not really new.
What was the notorious misogynist thing that he talked about? I think he talked about women in Taiwan. He found that women in
they don't wear makeup.
In Japan visually more pleasing because they wear proper makeup when they go on the streets, while the women in Taiwan are not and should learn from the Japanese examples. And I think that offended a lot of women.
Absolutely. But that was, again, the thing that I think is, you're totally right, but that rhetoric isn't new with Koenja. He's always kind of been this kind of blunt, offensive person, but I think for a really long time it really was the Liangani Jiaqin thing, I think, that really tipped people over. Before then, people were really willing to let a lot of this go, but that really pushed a lot of people over the edge. But there are still plenty of people who are pro-Taiwan independence who still will vote for Koenja, who will still support him.
Well, so say this was his last turn, what has been his legacy? Because when Chen Shui-bian, I think, cleaned up the traffic, actually. Traffic in Taipei used to be so bad. I remember we'd be coming down the highway and we'd just be stuck in the middle of the highway, but also you see this smog just caught in the city.
And also kind of completed the first ever MRT in Taipei.
MRT systems.
And also planned and laid out the foundation for building Taipei 101 and developing the Xinyi district, etc., etc. So it's easy to name just a few of the legacy or achievements that he has achieved during the 4 years of his service.
In Maizhou, the trash management system was implemented under him. Halongbing, urban renewal, right? Good or bad, he did a lot of it. What has been Ko's legacy? I'm kind of struggling to.
So he also did a traffic thing at Beimun. That's what he's very proud about. He now holds every rally at Beimun because look at what he did there. He did a lot of bureaucratic cleanup, I know, with simplifying the way that some welfare programs work. But I also am with you that if you were to ask me, like, what are the top 3 things Koenja has done, I don't think I could list 3. I can definitely list 2, but
I remember moments. I remember the first day he started, he gave the Da'an police chief a warning about the Chinese tourist in front of a 101. It came down very hard on that.
Not the tourists, but the people
On the
kind of
protests.
trying,
Excuse me.
harassing the
Yes.
Falun Gong people, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. And I remember when he on the Bayman, I remember when he also, there was bus lanes that was stripped, that cleared up a lot of traffic. I remember moments like these.
Right.
So it seems to be a lot of little things,
And,
correct?
and the
Not-
Shanghai thing was also a big accomplishment of his, which mixed reviews, but
Yeah, but I couldn't help but draw some kind of parallel between. I mean, you mentioned this Koenjo was a wild card, and then I think Chris mentioned Han Guoyu is more like a maverick wild card, and then getting really Trumpian. So it seems like the trend has moved to Taiwan, and why is that? It seems like the rhetorics they use or the kind of random comments that they make that actually reflect their personality and their kind of ideology or their values that are usually not so welcomed by voters. But how come it seems that they could get away with it and moreover even get popular with these rhetorics?
yeah. So I think there's plenty of parallels to draw between Han Guoyu and Ko Wen-je, and I think Han Guoyu's rhetoric is a cheaper version of Ko Wen-je's. I think Han Guoyu's was very successful in making himself look like this outsider who is new to the political system, which is totally not true. He has been a career politician for like 20, 30 years. He's always been a member of the KMT. But that doesn't stop the media from portraying him very differently. So like the SCMP op-ed on Han Guoyu was, described
It's
as
the
this,
South
like,
Morning China Post in Hong Kong.
Yes, which their op-eds tend to be very pro-China. They described Han Guoyu as this like total outsider who just showed up and is demanding real change in Kaohsiung, and kind of portrayed him as kind of always having this invested cause of Kaohsiung. He's new to Kaohsiung. He doesn't know the city particularly well, but that hasn't stopped a lot of people from supporting him. But in the same way, he's done so many YouTube videos, Facebook videos, him dancing with little girls, in a very like cute, like grandpa kind of way. In the same way that Ko Wen-je does a lot of his kind of media appearances. Is, they both say like a lot of people say like, oh, Ko Wen-je, he's such a cute guy. So, oh, Ko Wen-je hunk ai. And I see a lot of people also saying, oh, Han Guoyu ta hunk ai. Yeah, exactly. They see him like this cute little grandfather.
Ape is like a cute little neighborhood uncle that you see on the streets that, it's not particularly, dressed in a kind of a very, I wouldn't say down to earth, but how do you describe that? Song, the Ape. But that's popular,
Yeah. And, Han Guoyu also says a lot of very radical claims that he's not going to be able to fulfill. Like, we're going to go drill oil on Taiping Island or something like that. Like, he can't make that decision. He would only be a mayor of Kaohsiung. But that hasn't stopped him from kind of making these big claims. And I think that's kind of a big difference between he and Ko Wen-je. I don't think Ko Wen-je has ever gone to, and someone out there correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's ever done I'm going to make overly drastic claims that sound way too good to be true, knowing that they're too good to be true, but I'll say them anyway. I think Ko Wen-je has, for better or for worse, kind of been fairly blunt about what he's going to pursue. Problematically sometimes, he once referred to Taiwan as just like another market item on the shelf waiting to kind of be sold. So his rhetoric is kind of all over the place. But I think there are definitely plenty of similarities between how Ko Wen-je presents himself and how Han Guoyu presents himself. But I think there's also a lot of differences.
Well, Han Guoyu is now 14,000 votes ahead.
Okay.
I'm impartial.
On that. Let's take a short breather. And for the final hour, from 8 to 9, we'll talk about the referendums.
Great.
In particularly the same-sex marriage questions and the ones regarding to our national delegates to the Olympics.
Wonderful.
All right, what's going on with the numbers right now?
Okay, Taipei close race.
Close
New
race,
Taipei
3,000
City.
votes difference.
Taichung looks like KMT is winning. Tainan, DPP, Kaohsiung, close race. New Taipei City, KMT.
Was that
Miaoli County, KMT.
KMT has won it, or
Yeah.
this is self-declared,
Uh-huh.
self-declared victory.
It was just announced that the results of the referendum would not be announced until midnight today.
Midnight
Get
is fairly
those-
early. I remember earlier
get
they said
those
it was going to be
coffees.
past or it was going to be past
Yeah.
midnight.
Those coffees. So when on the pictures, if you see a red next to the names, that's self-declared victories, because the official results are not set, but I think based on votes differences,
Yeah.
a lot of candidates are celebrating.
So the Tainan mayoral candidate has self-declared victory.
County magistrate for Yunling,
And also Jiayi, Yilan,
Yilan.
KMT,
Hualien,
KMT.
Taidong, KMT,
Yes,
Penghu
KMT.
by 3,000 votes.
And Kinmen,
Wow.
also KMT. And Lianzhang, that's Mazu, where Mazu is, KMT.
by 3,000 votes.
Yeah, but that's traditionally these offshore islands.
They all
They're all KMT, but
they called Tainan, but that's not surprising.
Yilan is the first time that KMT got elected after maybe the last 30 years or
Wow.
I don't remember.
I think that's
how long,
Susan
but-
Tao about to give his final bow for the election.
Wow.
So Su Jin-chang, yeah, he had admitted defeat and he expresses his gratitude for the support of the voters.
Oh, there's Xinbei.
New Taipei.
I really thought that I'm trying to think about how many of my bets I've lost already. I thought Shinbei was going to be much closer than it is.
Yeah, I think we all thought so too.
Yeah, because Su Zhenchang, he was a magistrate for for Taipei
Yeah.
County, which was the predecessor of New Taipei,
Taipei
City.
City.
He served for 8 years, and he had left quite an impressive legacy.
From
over
what I
there.
understood was if there was going to be a DPP candidate that could do well in Shinbei, it was him.
But it seems like Yo Shi-kun, for his last election, running as a candidate for Xinbei mayor, he garnered slightly more support than Su Zhenchang.
I lost by 20万票.
Cohen just slightly in the lead.
By less than 6,000 votes, so we still have to wait.
Well,
Okay.
Hungary ahead by 13,000 votes
So
now.
it's been about 3 hours. So the polls closed at 4, but I don't think people actually got done at the polls till probably closer to
No.
5:30.
Yeah, because of the long queues that we see everywhere.
I got to go with my family to vote today, and it was just like we waited for an hour and a half, and everyone was complaining about.
Sorry, your family.
Oh,
Is your host family
No,
here?
Taiwan. My cousins are Taiwanese. My aunt is Taiwanese. My uncle lived in Taiwan for a long time and was married to a
Right.
Taiwanese woman who's my aunt. And my cousins are
Okay.
half and half. I'm very close with them.
So you do have a
Hi,
Taiwan family.
I do have Taiwanese family.
Okay.
I'm not Taiwanese at all. So I got to go with them today to vote. And that was
Did you
very
enjoy
exciting.
it? What's
Oh, it
the
was such a
atmosphere
blast.
like?
Besides complaining about the length, it was actually just fairly quiet. So I live in Da'an.
Okay.
And we went and stood in line for an hour and a half. Although before, they had like a long 30-minute powwow at home about who everyone was going to vote for. Because, once you get there, you're not supposed to really talk about it. So I took like a bunch of great pictures of my family. Like it was like very like Renaissance-esque picture of everyone like standing around this like one piece of paper. Like
They're these
have it
guys,
here.
right? These.
Yep, they all-
So we both
exactly.
these massively big broadsheets. If you haven't seen these, I was so excited. I was gonna bring them on. Well, to study these, I had to lay them on the floor and then stand on a chair. So you get this, about 8 pages of them.
And every district is
great.
different.
Yeah. Like
So this is
mine
my
is
Lijiang.
different.
Oh, so here's the one for the Taipei mayor. But are you're
I'm from
Xinbei?
Xinbei,
Oh.
so
Oh,
this
so
is
yours is-
New Taipei
Wow.
City. New Taipei City Council members.
These are our mayoral candidates here.
And there are actually 5 candidates, but very little is reported on number 1 and number 5.
Well, you see them during their good TV debates. And I'll feature all of them. I think that's about the only time
That they
I
get
see all of
exposed.
them. Yeah. Or
Talk
any.
about some honey lemonade.
I'm sorry.
Talk about honey lemonade.
Yeah. Yeah. But these are really, really helpful. Kind of.
So an interesting thing about voting in this election, though, that I thought was really cool was seeing what ballots look like here. So in the U.S., we get one big packet, and every issue, referendums, Senate, judges, all in one thing.
One sheet.
One sheet.
All on one
yes,
sheet of paper.
Everything's there. And not in the best way because, they cram everything in there and it's really hard to look at and you get kind of, you fall asleep when you read an American ballot. But the way it's presented in Taiwan was actually really clear and easy to see. Mayor, city councilor, and Lijiang were the three. You get 3 pieces of paper.
And 3 different colors.
And 3 different colors.
Yeah,
And
they're all color coded. It's great.
and everyone's picture is on there, so you can remember who you're voting for.
But not party affiliation.
Right, just their name and their picture and what number they are. Then you pick the number that you want to vote for, and then you turn in the 3 ballots separately. And it was a very novel. It's kind of a really novel, cool way to do it. The messy part, though, was watching the referendum votes, which were all printed on separate pieces of paper.
10 of them.
Yeah.
10 of them.
Yeah. But the texture were printed large and easily read. So that I appreciated that.
Yes, I just know my aunt did not vote in the referendums because it was
She chose
she
not
chose
to?
not
Or
to vote in the referendums
because of the topics or because of the long queue?
not because of the queue because it was kind of just it's new, it was complicated, and seemed like it seemed like a bit of a mafan kind of thing.
Troublesome.
And I think people kind of have to get used to that system. I'm not sure separate pieces of paper is a effective way to get people to care about referendum issues, but I also have no real expertise on that. It just seemed interesting to me.
That's Lin Jialong accepting defeat
No
for
way.
Taichung.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I lost a bet on that one. I thought he was going to win.
Are these bets with others in
Other
Taiwan, or
other
is it within the
this
Taiwan
is-
Studies Circle?
This is
Or
both.
did you kind of bet on the underground
No.
hush
None of the
underground?
No, just
that don't really exist.
no, just other Taiwan politics nerds.
Okay.
Oh wow. By a lot too.
Yeah.
Well, the non-existing underground betting or gamble
If it's not
on
too
election
if it's not too
results.
early to give a hot take, I think it's important to remember that 2016's election was a huge anti-blue election. Like, it was really what mattered most was that we've not voted for the KMT. And I think, some of the explanatory power in why Lin Jialong might have lost is because I think this might be kind of a bit of a natural rebalancing back to how people might vote originally. Not that there's way more to it than that. Dissatisfaction with Lin Jialong as mayor. But I don't think so. Taichung has never really been particularly green. It's mostly considered a very blue city. And there's kind of a curse of Taichung that if a green mayor gets elected, he never lasts more than 1 term. And I think that why would a DPP mayor win in Taichung 1 term in the first place? I think is usually when people are particularly dissatisfied with the KMT, they'll vote for the DPP. And I think this could be seen as just kind of Taichung returning to kind of its natural blue state. At least that's
so
my.
now we're waiting. It's pretty much set for New Taipei City, Taoyuan, Taichung, and Tainan. And we're still waiting for
Kaohsiung and
Taipei,
Taipei.
Kaohsiung,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so I want to turn to the referendums.
Great.
Let's start with same-sex marriage and the different questions, the sponsors of the questions.
Okay, shall I do the reading the text out loud
Sure,
again?
let's do.
Okay, for the same-sex marriages.
So there were two sponsors,
Yeah.
two different camps, right? And one sponsor put through 3 questions.
10, 11, and 12.
The other sponsor put through 2 questions.
Yeah, 14 and 15. Okay, and the one sponsor is affiliated or closely associated with the Christian groups.
The pro-family value.
Although Christians only account for, say, how many percent? 2%? Roughly
Yes.
2% of the total population. But their voice on this issue seems to be disproportionately loud.
Yes.
Okay. Number 10 on the referendum. Do you agree that civil code regulations should restrict marriage to being between a man and a woman?
So in plain speak, this means that basically should a marriage be between a man and a woman? That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And number 11, do you agree that the Ministry of Education and individual schools should not teach homosexual-related education as detailed under the enforcement rules for the Gender Equity Education Act in elementary and middle-level schools?
Education of same-sex marriage in schools.
They're voting to ban
Correct.
education of same-sex marriage in schools.
In
Correct.
elementary and middle-level schools,
Yes.
although it's detailed under the enforcement rules of Gender Equity Education Act. Okay. Number 12, do you agree to types of unions other than those stated in the marriage regulations in the Civil Code to protect the rights of same-sex couples who live together permanently?
Which number was that?
That's 12.
Do you agree to the types of unions other than those stated in the marriage regulations in the Civil Code to protect the rights of same-sex couples?
Who live together permanently.
So is the
So
other
same-sex-
than those saying like it should not protect them, or is
No,
that
it's
including them?
it should not include in the civil code. So it's
Right, so-
indirectly advocating like
For same-
you could have another law enacted to protect their rights as a couple, but not as a men and women marriage. So they don't want to recognize marriage, but although protecting their rights. So they, instead of incorporating their rights in same-sex marriage as basic human rights into the civil code, they wanted to advocate for the enactment of a separate law. Yeah. So that's number 12. And number 13, do you agree that... sorry.
14 and 15.
Oh, sorry. 14
Yeah.
and 15. Okay.
So the 14 and 15 are the pro marriage equality.
Do you agree that the Civil Code marriage regulations should be used to guarantee the rights of same-sex couples to get married? And number 15, do you agree that gender equity education as defined in the Gender Equity Education Act should be taught at all stages of the national curriculum, and that such education should cover courses on emotional education, sex education, and gay and lesbian education?
So how is it that we have two such opposing questions on the same referendum?
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
5 out of 10
How did
topics.
this happen?
So- This is a bit of a mess, but there's a reason why it happened this way. So it starts back in 2017. The referendum laws were changed. The idea was that they wanted to make, they being, this was largely sponsored by the NPP, the New Power Party, that the goal was to make referendums more accessible. In and of itself, that seems like a good thing, that civil society has more access to put forth referendums, political ideas that it wants to see happen, even though civil individuals themselves might not have direct access to political power. Referendums, largely speaking, are a good thing. The other side of that coin is when that kind of door opened, it opened for everyone. So in the same way that it became easier for referendums for progressive politics to kind of get through the stages that they need to go to get to a vote, so did conservative politics. And long story short, I think that's kind of the story of what happened. There's fantastic reporting on the intricacies of the history of the same-sex gay rights struggle in Taiwan. William Yang and J. Michael Cole both have plenty of really, really great pieces out there right now. But let's start with the anti-gay rights groups. They start basically with the very conservative Christian groups in Taiwan. So, like you said, even though Christians are not by any means a representative religion in Taiwan, they're very vocal. Especially their groups are very well funded by international sources to kind of support anti-gay rights in Taiwan. Now, the question then is, how did these anti-gay Christian groups become so influential? And I think a large part of that has to do with the way that they have framed gay marriage and homosexuality in Taiwan as this thing that they very much have demonized it, not in religious terms. So because there's not a terribly large number of Christian people in Taiwan, you can't convince people not to like gay marriage because of Christian reasons. You have to find other reasons. And they've done that through spreading a lot of false information about AIDS and how AIDS will skyrocket. They've done a lot of poor misinformation about if we open the gate to homosexuality, then there's going to be more, polygamy or polyamory and polygamy, and these considered bad things are going to happen to civil society. I mean, it's gone as extreme as there were broadcasts just last week saying that women's sexual reproductive parts are more clean, and that's why everyone ought to be heterosexual. But where did they get this? Where did they spread this information? A lot of it went through parent-teacher associations. So these parent-teacher associations are on every campus, every elementary, middle, high, college campus all over Taiwan. And once these hyper-religious groups convinced the parent-teacher associations to be against gay marriage, the spread of information just became that much easier. And I think that is at least part of the story about how this kind of became such a mobilized and well-funded and well-supported issue. The reason that they became so mobilized this time, I think, largely is because of the ruling that the Grand Court of Justices, I think that's the name, the Supreme Court of Taiwan made 2 years ago. So to even talk about that ruling, you have to back up a little bit. Tsai Ing-wen in 2016 campaigned on gay marriage rights. When she came into office, she very much took a step back and said, well, maybe we should hear out everyone on this.
Build more consensus before we make a final
I myself,
move.
as president, should not make a decision on this. So she kind of sidestepped the issue and said, I'm going to let the Supreme Court decide this. Now, that act in and of itself, talking about why do young people not support Tsai Ing-wen, why are they dissatisfied with the party, that's a huge reason.
Yeah, because they see her as a backtracking.
Absolutely.
Not taking a decision on this and wavering and kind of letting them down on her campaign promises. Yeah.
Now, even after she took this sidestep, the Supreme Court still said gay marriage, it is illegal to not allow people to marry because of sexual orientation. And they said that legislation must be made within the next 2 years that legalizes gay marriage. Otherwise, gay couples will be covered under the laws that exist starting in 2 years. So they had 2 years to do it. And after 2 years, nothing had happened. And within those 2 years, so when, kind of the way that, social movements start or are kind of mobilized, I think you could really frame the the extreme Christian groups and the anti-gay marriage groups as a counter mobilization to Tsai Ing-wen and to the Supreme Court's order that gay marriage has to pass in the 2 years. I think that ruling that gay marriage had to pass in 2 years is a huge motivating factor for why so many anti-gay marriage groups mobilized so quickly and so efficiently in the last 2 years. Now, when those groups kind of counter mobilized, then the counter mobilization started with the pro-gay marriage groups realizing that these anti-gay marriage groups are actually really powerful, and oh my goodness, we have to have our own referendums, otherwise, what's going to happen if these anti-gay marriage rights pass? And another really important point that I think gets under-discussed when we're talking about the gay marriage referendums, it's not just marriage, it's education. And I think the education part is almost more infuriating, but important to some degree, because it's a matter of not letting people talk about homosexuality in the classroom, let alone getting married. So, you have marriage and you have education, and they're both on the ballot. It's not just marriage. It's education is a big part of both sides of these referendums.
And it's not just homosexuality. I think it covers LGBT.
Sex ed in general, the entire spectrum of
Yeah.
LGBTQIA individuals. And there's a lot more at stake within kind of the framework of gay rights than just marriage at stake here. So does that kind of summarize the story?
Yeah.
So then, there's a lot to talk about in terms of, do these referendums matter?
Right. What are the legal procedures and that have to follow up?
What's interesting, I think, is also important to note. In order for a referendum to actually pass, it has to receive affirmation from 25% of the legal voting body, meaning not 25% of the people who vote tonight,
But
25% of the eligible voters in Taiwan.
Yeah, so that's roughly
About 4.5.
About 50 million people, or
don't
how
know.
many? I think roughly about 15 million people, eligible voters. Yeah,
Total. Okay,
Yeah.
then that's total eligible voters, or is that
yeah,
okay?
nationwide.
So that's kind of what has to happen tonight in order for them to pass. We saw this recently with within the last year or so. So Huang Guochang, who's a politician in the New Power Party, he's been very vocal of supporting gay marriage and gay rights in Taiwan. And an anti-gay marriage group actually started a petition and a referendum to have him removed because of his stances on gay marriage. And they got enough signatures to actually have this vote. And when the vote took place, there were far more people who voted to have him kicked out of office than people who wanted him to stay. But because they didn't actually get 25% of the eligible voting population of their district, the referendum didn't pass. So when we see the numbers on the screen tonight, it's important to remember that even if the numbers go one way or not the other, whether in affirmation or negation, it's important to remember that that doesn't matter until we know what kind of number target they actually have to get for it to even pass. Then there's the whole debacle about what happens if both of them pass. Because we very well could have gay marriage
Conflicting
voted to become
results.
legal and to become illegal in the same election. And education. And that I like to think that would just naturally cancel them out, which is not the end of the world.
We go back to as if today didn't
We would go
happen,
back as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
If only supportive gay marriage and gay education passes, I think that just kind of lights a fire under the legislative yuan to actually get something written quickly that shows that the public really does support this issue and that they need to kind of step on it. If only anti-gay marriage passes, that's kind of the complicated scenario people are worried about. Because I think the important disclaimer to make is that if only the anti-gay marriage referendums pass, that doesn't mean gay marriage in Taiwan goes away and that the dream kind of dies. There is a huge court argument to be made about whether or not the referendum will actually mean anything because the Supreme Court has already said they have to legalize it. This is uncharted territory. No one really knows what happens or like what trumps what.
The legality.
Exactly.
Afterwards, yeah.
Because there's nothing binding in the referendum. It just it kind of signals that 25% of Taiwan's eligible voting body felt a certain way about a certain subject. Now, obviously, that is grounds for anti-gay marriage groups to just pound politicians into saying, look, this referendum passed, now you have to do something. And they're going to feel, it signals that there's a lot of support there's a lot of support of anti-gay marriage. I know it's like a complicated way to say it, but there's not as much support for gay marriage as I think we celebrated, maybe slightly prematurely.
I think over the past month, I live in Taipei, but I traveled a little bit last month to several areas in southern Taiwan. The only voices I saw in Pingdong and Kaohsiung and some of Taichung were the anti-same-sex marriage.
Yes, they're so well funded and they're so organized, and they were even today. There are cases of them protesting or campaigning for anti-gay marriage on election day, which is super illegal in Taiwan.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll actually be punished, and they'll probably get away with it. And that's really too bad. It's a bad
there
look.
was I receive kind of lying messages and messages on social media on campaigning for banning same-sex marriage. And it's also illegal because during the last week, you're not supposed to spread or spread any related, solicitations, etc. But obviously,
Kalinja is no longer in the lead.
By how much? By 1,000 votes?
By 1,000 votes.
1,000 votes. That's
I know. I need to stop freaking out every time I see that number change.
no, there
By 1,000
was a map of Taiwan showing, mostly blue color covering most of the cities and counties, but that
was not unexpected, right? We kind of knew this was going to happen.
But we haven't got any news on the turnout, the results of the county council elections.
Yeah. And I also
City
know
council elections.
it gets even more complicated because I'm not sure if every district, maybe you can, because every district is a little different with how many seats are available for their city council.
Yeah,
so there's
that's true.
incumbents and they don't get replaced, and then there's
newcomers,
right,
and
they
candidates.
kind of fight for one or two seats.
It's
So
kind of complicated to explain
Yes.
to, and it doesn't really. Well, it shapes local politics, but it doesn't shape national politics as much as these the races of these 6 municipalities in
Exactly.
Taiwan. Yeah.
And Hungary is pulling ahead just by
Slightly
1,000
ahead.
every
Slightly
time. It's
enough.
adding
So
1,000 more
still
votes every time we turn.
Yeah, neck to neck for Taipei City and Kaohsiung, and it's already 8:30. So this is also quite unusual compared to past elections. Usually by 7:30, we more or less know the final
I'm
results.
hoping this means it was a very good voter turnout today
I hope so.
throughout Taiwan.
Yeah, but then even though we talk about certain kind of negative sides of the referendum, etc., but I think overall, having these issues or topics on the referendum is a positive thing because it reflects how how democracy is working, and it reflects how vibrant Taiwan's democracy is, and how close it is to the people, and how people feel that it is part of their daily life, and then these topics are kind of really close to them, and then they want to express their opinions.
absolutely. I think there's a really important, regardless of what the results are in Taiwan today, I think there's a very important silver lining. So there's a very famous political scientist who a few years ago wrote this piece that said democracy is in the decline. that people don't like democracy anymore, people don't support democracy anymore. And I think Taiwan has always been this kind of, shining beacon of hope that people do still value their democratic system. And if in 2018, if this really was a record-setting number in terms of turnout, that's amazing. I'm really excited to hear what the actual turnout rate was. But I think this is globally, this is just a really important statement that Taiwan has made tonight, that even in 2018, democracy is still a core value of Taiwan, regardless of your political affiliation.
Now I want to turn to our last question on the referendum, exactly about Taiwan.
Oh, yes.
Taiwan. This is the referendum to apply to rename our national delegation at the Tokyo Olympics, as well as following other sporting events.
So it's number 13 on the referendum item. Do you agree that Taiwan should apply to participate in all international sporting events, including the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo, using the name Taiwan
instead of Chinese Taipei? So this week we've seen the latest letter from the IOC, the International Olympics Committee, dated November 16th, and I want to read here a paragraph here. Any change to the name of the Chinese Taipei Olympic Committee delegation is subject to the approval of the IOC Executive Board, in according to the Olympic Charter. The IOC Executive Board has already examined the situation as a referendum at its meeting on the 2nd and 3rd of May 2018 and decided to reconfirm IOC's position to not approve any change to the name of the Chinese Taipei Olympic Committee. Meaning, the IOC has said flat out, should this referendum pass and should we apply, it's going to be denied. Our team will remain Chinese Taipei. So the letter continues, and I want to read the next paragraph that's being disputed. I want to hear, because I know that this week you've also spoken to the organizers. So I want to get from you a sense of what was going through their head. Were they worried? What's the mood like? How do they interpret the letter? So here's the paragraph. Any attempts to exercise undue pressure on the Chinese Taipei Olympic Committee to breach the 1981 agreement and or to act against the decisions of the IOC Executive Board would be considered as external interference, which might expose the CTOC to the protective measures set out in the Olympic Charter in these circumstances. Therefore, the IOC is hoping that the interests of the Olympic movement in Chinese Taipei will prevail over political considerations, so as not to disrupt the CTOC delegation and the athletes in their preparation for upcoming international sporting events, and to avoid any unnecessary complication. How is this interpreted?
So I know that a lot of people within activist circles have critiqued the way it was translated into Mandarin, because the Mandarin actually makes it sound even more dire, as if like it's a guaranteed they're out if they approve this kind of thing. And I don't think the English necessarily says that if
so
this
bad.
No, I think it sounds like what like a bureaucratic Olympic committee has to say back to something like this. It doesn't sound great. I think there's a bit of hypocrisy about it when they say let's not make this name political, when the name Chinese Taipei is an extremely political name.
Right, but it also uses the name Chinese Taipei as a location, right? It says hoping that the interests of the Olympic movement in Chinese Taipei.
Right. I know that the organizers of this referendum movement, this is way more of a signal to show support, one, for Taiwan, but also kind of the referendum system, than necessarily actually getting the name changed. Obviously, they want the name changed. I think they were very realistic, though, about their expectations. I think they almost kind of wanted a response like this. I think the problem, though, is that a lot of it has kind of backfired in the sense that people are now, who might have voted in favor of it before, after reading this and the mistranslation that makes it seem way more dire, this new fear that, oh, if I support this referendum, then the athletes in Taiwan won't be able to compete in the Olympics. Suddenly now they're not going to support it. And I think that's kind of been the biggest challenge that they faced since this note came out, is how to convince people that that's not really what the note is saying. And that's a very difficult thing that they've kind of been put up against in these last couple of weeks. I don't think that they are, defeated by any means. I think there's kind of two ways to interpret this referendum. If it doesn't pass, there's plenty of ways to explain why it didn't pass. Mm-hmm. Either just blatant lack of support, the Olympic letter scared them off, the mistranslation scared them off. I also know that there's a large number of people who would have been in favor of this if they did not say the name of Taiwan, if they had said ROC instead of Taiwan, or just not Chinese Taipei. So to expand on that, the wording of the referendum says we want to compete not as Chinese Taipei, but as Taiwan. Mm-hmm. The reason that's controversial is because that's a very pro-independence stance, is to say we want to be recognized as Taiwan, end of name, not Republic of China, not Taiwan, Republic of China, or any kind of variation thereof.
Chinese Taipei or whatever.
We specifically want to be Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Now that's fine. It's just that's a very pro-independent stance. Mm-hmm. If they had said instead this referendum is to state we reject the name Chinese Taipei, full stop, they would have had much more support. If they had said we reject the name Chinese Taipei and want to go under the ROC, they might have had more support from moderates. Their decision to say we want to run as Taiwan in the Olympics was meant to try to mobilize pro-independence movements. Mm-hmm. So the referendum law, or I'm not sure if this is referendum law or constitutional law, but regardless, the Constitution or the status of Taiwan as a country, whether or not it's independent or part of China, cannot be decided through referendum. Mm-hmm. 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 The pro-independence organizers kind of used this as a testing ground, not even a testing ground, with kind of the hope that pro-independence activists and pro-independence circles would come out in favor of this referendum as a means of signaling pro-independence sentiment. So kind of using this as a proxy to show the rest of society's pro-independence stance. Mm-hmm. And if it passes, I think at this point, if it passes, that is a huge signal that there is a lot of people in Taiwan who are really pro Taiwan independence and are willing to put a lot on the line for that. If it doesn't pass, that doesn't mean that sentiment isn't there. I think a lot of people got scared off since this letter came out who probably would have sort of supported it before.
If it passes, does the Chinese Taipei Committee, Olympics Committee, does it have to apply? Does it have to list it? Yeah.
Even if it passes, they're not going to change it. And I think the organizers know that. And I think the Olympic Committee telling the organizers no does more for the organizers than it does for the Olympic Committee.
Wait, so the CTOC does not have to comply with the result of this referendum, even if it passes?
No.
So then what... if we knew that, if everybody knew that, I'd say, well, they still have the final decision.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's true for all the referendums. None of the referendums are technically binding.
Then, in that case, why would we still be scared off by it if it's not binding at all?
Great question. I think that's kind of what a lot of the organizers were trying to mobilize as well, was that, again, this it is way more about sending a signal of pro-Taiwan stances than it is about the Olympics. Now, obviously, they care about the Olympics. But this wasn't a bunch of sports enthusiasts. This was a bunch of pro-Taiwan political activists. And I think that's an important distinction to make when we're talking about... Wow, Hanguya has a big lead. I'm sorry. I think he's up by...
Wow. Kaohsiung City.
Wow.
It's up by 40,000, almost.
Well, and Ding Xiuzhou and Ko Wen-ze are still
racing.
Still racing. They swap. They swap every time.
Very close call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really want them to start counting the votes for the referendums, and that we've spent so much time talking about the referendums for good reasons. But
yeah, it's if they're done with mayoral elections in the next half hour, I bet they'll be done in the next half hour, 45 minutes at the most. Yeah. And then I would really like to see I want to see the local elections too, because I'm heavily invested in seeing how the other third force party candidates all did. Not just the MPP, but.
But what are the other smaller
Right,
parties?
so like the
Yeah,
Social
can you
Democratic
talk-
Party.
Can you talk about that?
Right, so you mean the NPP is the largest of the third force parties. In the 2016 election, it got 6.8% of the total national vote, which might not seem like very much, but they didn't exist a year before that election. So without actually existing, they got enough of the vote to have 5 members in Taiwan's parliament. That's pretty amazing. None of the other third force parties came even close. That is not to say that they haven't stopped trying to remain a force to be reckoned with. I think, I used to know the number. I know that the NPP has 40 candidates fielded, and I think there are probably close to 40 to 50 other third force party candidates total, if not more than that. A lot come from the Social Democratic Party, the Trees Party, the Radical Party, formerly known as the Radical Wings Party, but they changed their name to the Radical Party, thankfully, because I'm not sure where the wings came from. And there's another one called the Obasan Alliance, which is a bunch of middle-aged, mostly women activists who decided to band together to form this kind of grassroots, not really a political party, but a political organization that they're kind of running under.
It's great. So
It's
awesome.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. And they have candidates kind of all over.
What does it take to start a political party here? I mean, administratively, what do you have to do? Yeah, legally.
You need 10 people to run. You have to have I think you only need 30 to 50 people, and then you just have to run for to be eligible for the party list ballot. This isn't for local elections. This is for national elections. You have to have 10 candidates running from your party. So that's actually the main reason why the Social Democratic Party and the Green Party allied together in 2016, because they needed 10 people. And when they combined together, then they had 10 people, and that's why they ran under that party banner.
Plotting our party formation.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What? Oh, this is at
Oh,
the
that's
the
so
KP
crazy. And
headquarters
that's just-
for
Cohen's
Ding
headquarters.
Shouzhong.
I mean, this map that's on the
Children,
screen right
yeah.
now in
It's
2016
yeah.
was entirely green.
Green, yeah.
And the
Except
amount of
a few,
except a few spots. There are a few spots, but this is just. I don't know if this is just the pendulum swinging back the other way.
I mean, it has to be, right?
I
mean,
really think so. I really would be hesitant to say that this shows a return of support for the KMT, that this is much more a signal of dissatisfaction with the DPP than it is support for the KMT.
And why do you think after Tsai Ing-wen has introduced all these major reform programs such as pension reform
Yeah.
and labor standards reform and also transitional justice
Yes.
issues, kind of fulfilling her campaign promises to a certain extent? And why are people now kind of
Well, she passed legislature on these issues,
Yeah.
but to say she passed good legislature on these issues, I think is
No.
kind of a much
Yeah,
harder thing
yeah.
to argue. With all three of those, you have people. She's done a fantastic job of upsetting both sides of the political spectrum. You have people on the left saying they're not happy with the way that she's done labor reform, that she's actually not done enough for workers' rights. You have people on the right saying, well, actually now she's taken away so much of what the bosses and owners of companies can do that she's kind of upset both sides. Transitional justice is still, there's still so much that people want her to do that she really has not done. I honestly, like, if you ask me, like, what has she actually done for transitional justice, I'm not entirely sure. Which should just be shame on me for not knowing well enough. But
Well, I think for starter, there's finally a committee for it.
there is a committee for the
settle-
investigation of past harms, like
Yeah.
228. Yes,
no, that committee was
that was
set
that
up.
was under Mind Jail, wasn't it?
Oh no, that was under Children.
Children,
That was
excuse
much
me, yeah.
I mean,
longer ago. But finally, a committee set up on handling the illegally acquired party assets.
That's actually a really good point that, is worth noting. That the KMT used to be called like the world's richest political party because they had so much money. Because even though Taiwan's democratic transition was very peaceful and good, the KMT just kind of became another political party, but still owned everything. And it really only was this last year that the DPP froze their assets, and that is a good thing. So that is a very good thing that Tsai Ing-wen has done.
And she also openly apologized as head of state to the indigenous groups and the peoples in Taiwan.
True.
For the past harms that the authorities have inflicted on them.
But even they're not entirely happy with how that outcome went. So I was actually there after she was inaugurated during their first major protests outside on Ketagalan Boulevard. And there weren't that many indigenous activists there. And Tsai Ing-wen had riot police just kind of entirely encircle them. And it just looked like this huge overreaction. It didn't look good. Eventually she did her apology, but I think she kind of made herself look worse before she made herself look better.
I want to turn very quickly to what's on the TV screen here. That's Yao Wen-tze accepting defeat and apologizing to his supporters
for not garnering enough votes as expected.
Honestly, he got way more votes than I ever thought he would.
Yeah.
And again, those votes are just votes in protest of Ko Wen-je, not in support of Yao Wen-je. Yao Wen-je was not expected to do well at all. He didn't do well, but he did better than I thought he would do. But that's purely just votes he took away from Ko Wen-je.
But he persevered to the very end.
Because
for I think just a few weeks back, or even just 2 weeks back, there were rumors about
dropping out.
Yeah, dropping out, and then he was under some pressure for dropping out, etc. And there were kind of rumors circulating who was kind of maneuvering behind the scenes.
Oh, if he had dropped out, Ko Wen-je would have won. Will win. Might still win. Who knows? I should not speak too soon.
Don't know yet. Well, we're down to our final 10 minutes of our show. Just to give you guys a heads up, I hope you've had enough coffee and drinks and popcorns and dumplings
to get through this night.
And
the night's not over because referendums are probably just
have more coffee and stay up for the referendums.
We're still waiting for the results for Taipei City and Kaohsiung City to come out, and it's almost 9:00.
Well, we're getting they have the headline for Kaohsiung that Chen Qimai is very serious luck as his situation has become pretty dire. I think by now he's probably 20,000 votes off, behind probably.
Yeah. That's enough for defeat.
Yeah.
The one thing I wish they would have on screen is percentage reported,
or a pie chart.
Yeah, because at least in American elections they say he's winning by X percent with X percent of votes counted.
Yeah. Although by the way that Hungary had been talked about the past month, I would have thought the differences was going to be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I think I knew he was a real force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was just so much better at campaigning than Chun was, to the point that it almost seemed like a bit of an overhype. I think you're right. I think people were kind of expecting Hang Guoyu to win dramatically, and this is just a little victory, which is a little reassuring, but also not.
Yeah, I would like to talk. I mean, as we enter the last 10 minutes of our program, I'd like to talk a little bit about this seemingly landslide defeat of DPP, how it would impact Tsai's administration, and the likely possible political changes that would occur in the next few months. I would say it's very likely that we would see a cabinet reshuffle, and the dynamics within the DPP, like different factions, would definitely be affected, and also maybe and perhaps very likely that President Tsai would no longer serve as the chairperson of DPP. So these would be major changes for the dynamics in DPP. And what other aspects do you think would be affected in terms of DPP politics?
Yeah, I think Tsai Ing-wen has 2 years to really do something amazing.
2 years or
No,
just
less than
1
2 years.
year?
1 year.
Because
That's actually the
yeah.
next presidential election is a year from January.
Yeah.
So it's
It's 1
14
year,
months
yeah.
away, 13 months away.
Yeah, and
And if the election was tomorrow, Tsai Ing-wen would lose, I think. And I think she's really got to impress a lot of people. I don't know yet the results of tonight. I still think Ko Wen-je is seriously considering running for president in 2020.
what about would Tsai still be nominated as a DPP candidate?
Yes.
You think so?
Yes.
For re-election.
Yes.
right?
For re-election, I think so. If not, because I just don't know who else they would nominate. Chunju maybe, but I don't think that would really
That would
work.
Well, who would be a top contender now for a party chairman and woman?
don't know.
Not sure. And it is important to note that when a party... So this happened under Ma Ying-jeou in 2012. He stepped down as party chair, but still got reelected as president. So just because Tsai Ing-wen steps down doesn't necessarily mean her chances at reelection are just like totally gone. It actually doesn't make a huge difference, I don't think, based purely off of looking at Ma Ying-jeou's example. It's still not a good look, though. I don't think.
See you tomorrow. We'll have a full colored
Full
picture.
breakdown. I
Tomorrow's
really,
perfect.
you know, I knew the KMT would probably win Shinbei. No, I didn't think they were going to win Shinbei. I think I had more faith in Su, but I knew they were probably going to win Kaohsiung, and that was a huge defeat. I really do not think they were going to take Shinbei
Taichung.
and Taichung, and maybe Taipei. Man, it's okay to be wrong.
Now they already have Xinbei and Taichung, and looks like Kaohsiung is the next one, and Taipei we're still waiting.
Yeah.
And then later we would also know the results of the city and county
it's
council.
true. And that'll also tell. I think the real test is still 2020. So if the KMT dominates in 2020, then I will be more convinced that there might be an actual return in support for the KMT. Until then, I see this more as a natural disdain for the DPP more than support for the KMT. I will think it's support for the KMT in 2020 if they do well.
We'll see. I'll see you
We'll
back in
see.
2 years.
Yeah, well, not
Less
even.
than-
Less than 2 years.
Yeah.
14 months.
Yeah. But even that, I think there's still a good chance of there being a 3-candidate presidential run. I don't. If Han Kuo-yu wins this election, I actually don't know if he would run for president or if he would stay in Kaohsiung. But I think there's still a good chance he would run. And if it's between Tsai Ing-wen, Ko Wen-je, and Han Kuo-yu, then we will have an even more dramatic election than we did this time, I think.
Yeah, and things change very fast here in
Yes.
Taiwan. So what is popular now may not be popular next month.
Very
and
true.
what is the hot topic this week or even today may not be a hot topic anymore for discussion 2 days later. So it's hard to make any prediction now. I mean, who would have thought that Han Kuo-yu would be so popular just maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago?
I was here all summer, and he was not a thing. I left Taiwan the first week of September, and he was just known as, I just knew he was the Kaohsiung candidate. It really was like so sudden that this happened.
Yeah, I think for me too, it went from I kind of have heard of this name to everybody's talking about this.
And that's the media machine, I think, just really at work. And to how much China influence had on that is, I think, yet to be determined. But either way, he ran a heck of a campaign really quickly.
Yeah.
I'm totally blown away.
It's worth
character.
studying, huh? As a political scientist.
Yes, this makes Taiwan a fascinating place for all aspiring political scientists to come study.
What are some of the best places to study Taiwan, outside of Taiwan, of course?
Oh, so in terms of like institutes for Taiwan studies, so SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in the UK, I believe, has the largest Taiwan studies program outside of Taiwan, run by the wonderful David Fell. And then in America, I know not necessarily political science, but the University of Austin, Texas, has the largest Taiwan studies program, I think, in the U.S. But the University of Washington, Seattle also hired a new professor of Taiwan studies, and UCLA is about to hire 2 more professors specifically in Taiwan studies. So we are growing slowly but surely
great
in a
to
very
hear.
exciting way. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, we still have like 2 minutes left. Can you kind of tell us and share with us why you got so interested in Taiwan politics? I'm sure a lot of people would share the same kind of curiosity
Totally.
with me.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, great. So, So I already explained briefly. So I have family in Taiwan. My uncle is also American. He lived in Taiwan for 20 to 30 years. His wife is Taiwanese. My cousins are half and half. Their kids are half and half. And I'm very, very close with them. When I was in college, I majored in Chinese. I took Chinese for fun to see if I would like it or not, and I ended up loving it. And I came to Taiwan to study abroad because why not? I had Taiwanese family. I lived down in Taichung. My very first Taiwanese friends that I made were very politically active, and they took me to my first protest, and I learned all about Taiwanese politics and youth culture and social movements in Taiwan, got very fascinated by it, and decided that's what I wanted to study for the rest of my life.
That was really good.
So,
Yeah.
is
Really
that
good.
under time? Good.
Yeah.
So, studying Taiwan, have you got yourself to learn Taiwanese or Southern Fujian dialect?
Not even a little bit, and it's absolutely shame on me.
Or Hakka or other indigenous languages?
My big challenge. So I don't just study Taiwan. I'm interested kind of very broadly in social movements and party politics around the world. But my 2 cases are Taiwan and Hong Kong, and I've actually been trying to invest time into learning Cantonese to be able to engage with Hong Kong activists more, which has been really difficult.
Well, do more. Come back.
Yeah.
Come back and study. Actually, I think there's a Taiwanese and Cantonese. There's some crossovers, and so you could do both at the same time. Yeah.
A lot of sounds.
So really quickly before we leave, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a blast.
today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was wonderful.
Where can people find you on social media if they want to talk to you, have more ideas, and engage in a dialogue with you? How do they find you?
Of course, I am on Twitter at lnachman32, LNACHMAN32. That's my last name. And then my email is out there as well.
Cool, thank you. And I'm Emily at Emily Y. Wood on Twitter.
And I'm Trenny. I don't have Twitter.
But this has been great. Thank you all for tuning in. And this is a production of Radio Taiwan International. Look for their regular shows on their website. And also, tune in if you're in Taiwan. Till the next election.
Good night.
Good night.